Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Jonathan Ravenshollow, but everyone calls me John. I've been fighting fires in these Georgia mountains for 18 years, just like my daddy did before me. He died in a forest fire when I was 12, burned to death trying to save other people. That's the thing about us Ravenshollows. We don't run from fire, we run toward it. It's October 1981 and these mountains are dry as old bones. We haven't had rain in 2 months. The leaves should be turning colors by now, but instead they're just brown and cracking. Every step I take sounds like walking on broken glass. The air tastes like dust and dead things. I work in the Chattahoochee National Forest up around Blood Mountain. Folks say it got that name from some old Cherokee battles, but I think it's because the dirt turns red when it gets wet with blood. Not that we've seen any water lately. My radio crackles. John, you there? Yeah, Maria. What's up? Maria Santos is the best fire person I know. She can look at smoke and tell you exactly how big a fire will get and which way it'll go. Smart as a whip and twice as tough. We got a problem up on Widowmaker Ridge. Found Bill's crew. Bill Hendricks runs our smoke jumper team. 6 guys who jump out of planes to fight fires. They're the best of the best. But Maria's voice sounds wrong. Scared. What kind of problem? Just get up here, John. Bring the coroner. The drive up the mountain takes 20 minutes on roads that aren't really roads. More like paths where trees got pushed out of the way. My truck bounces and slides on the dry dirt. The forest looks sick. Trees standing like skeletons. No birds singing. No bugs buzzing. Nothing. When I get to the ridge, I see Maria standing next to 6 black shapes on the ground. She's not moving, just standing there like a statue. Her face is white as paper. Maria? She points at the shapes. They're all dead, Joe. And all 6 of them. I walk closer. The shapes used to be people. Now they're just burned. Burned so bad I can't tell which one is Bill. Burned so bad their bones are showing through. The smell hits me like a punch in the face. Sweet and sick and wrong. But here's the thing that makes my skin crawl. The ground around them is fine. The trees are fine. The leaves under their bodies aren't even singed. It's like someone took a giant blowtorch and burned just these 6 men. Nothing else. How? I ask. I don't know. Maria's voice is small. Temperature readings are all wrong, too. My instruments say it's 120 degrees right here, but it's only 80 everywhere else. I kneel down next to what used to be a person. The metal buckles on his gear melted. His radio looks like black soup, but the grass 3 inches away looks normal. Where's the fire? I ask. If something burned this hot, where's the burned area? Where's the smoke damage? Maria shakes her head. There wasn't a fire, John. That's what I'm trying to tell you. These men burned, but nothing else did. A cold feeling starts in my stomach and spreads out like ice water. In 18 years of fighting fires, I've never seen anything like this. Fire doesn't work this way. Fire spreads. Fire leaves marks. Fire burns everything it touches. Maybe lightning, I say, but I don't believe it. Clear skies all week, Maria says. Besides, lightning would have hit the trees first. I stand up and look around. The forest is quiet, in a way that makes my ears hurt. No wind. No animal sounds, just the buzz of flies starting to find the bodies. We need to call this in, I say. Already did. State Fire Marshal is coming up tomorrow. Coroner, too. As we load the bodies into black bags, I keep looking at the trees around us. Something's wrong with them, too. The bark looks darker. The leaves hang down like they're sick. And it's hot heat, or hotter than it should be. When we finish, Maria and I sit in my truck with the air conditioning running. John, she says quietly, my grandfather used to tell stories about these mountains, Cherokee stories, about spirits that lived in the fire. Maria, don't start with that. He said during the worst droughts, when the forest got too dry, something would wake up, something that hunted the people who tried to control fire. I look at her. Maria's got a college degree. She studies fire behavior with computers and math. She doesn't believe in spirits. You're saying a ghost did this? I'm saying 6 experienced firefighters died in a way that can't happen. She stares out at the ridge, and I'm saying this drought is the worst one in 50 years. That night, I can't sleep. I keep thinking about Bill Hendricks. 20 years of fighting fires. Survived 3 helicopter crashes. Had 4 kids and a wife who loved him. Now he's just a bag of bones and ash. And I keep thinking about the trees around those bodies. How they looked sick. How the air felt thick and hot, like breathing soup. Most of all, I keep thinking about what Maria said. About something waking up. In the mountains, there are things older than people. Older than towns and roads and names on maps. Things that remember when fire was sacred, not something to be fought and put out. But I'm John Ravenshollow. My family has been fighting fires for 2 generations. I don't believe in spirits. At least I didn't before today. The state fire marshal shows up at sunrise. His name is Tom Bradley, and he looks like a man who's seen everything twice. Gray hair, gray mustache, eyes that don't believe anything until he sees it himself. "Show me," he says. We drive up to the ridge together. In the morning light, the burned area looks even stranger. 6 perfect circles of ash where the bodies were. Everything else normal. Tom kneels down and takes pictures. He measures things. He scrapes up samples of dirt and puts them in little plastic bags. He doesn't talk much, but I can see him getting more confused as the morning goes on. "Temperature readings?" he asks Maria. "Still showing 115 to 120 degrees in the burn areas. Normal everywhere else." Tom checks his own thermometer. Frowns. Checks it again. "Equipment malfunction," he says, but he doesn't sound sure. "All our equipment?" Maria asks. "Mine, John's, the stuff the crew had with them?" Tom doesn't answer. He's staring at something in the dirt. "What's this?" I look where he's pointing. There are marks in the ground, like footprints, but bigger, much bigger, and they're burned into the dirt, not pressed in, burned in. "Could be from their boots," Tom says. "Heat from the burning could have made the prints." But the prints are twice the size of any boot, and they lead away from the bodies into the forest. "We follow them," I say. The tracks go up the ridge between the trees. They're easy to follow because they're burned black into the ground. Each one is about 2 feet long and shaped like a human foot. But wrong. The toes are too long. The heel is too wide. After about 50 yards, the tracks stop. Just end, like whatever made them flew away. "Underground gas pocket," Tom says. "Sometimes natural gas burns up through the soil and makes weird patterns." He's trying hard to make this normal. I understand that. Normal is safe. Normal means you can write a report and go home to your family and not think about impossible things. But normal doesn't leave footprints. We're walking back to the trucks when Maria grabs my arm. "Look at the trees," she whispers. The trees around the burn area are starting to change. The bark is getting darker, almost black. The leaves are curling up like they're getting cooked, and it's getting hotter. Tom notices it too. "Delayed fire damage," he says. "Sometimes it takes a while to show up." "From what fire?" Maria asks. Tom doesn't answer. That afternoon, my radio starts acting up. A static cuts through every transmission. Sometimes I hear voices that aren't supposed to be there, voices speaking words I don't understand. Maria calls me around 4 o'clock. "John, you need to get back up here. Now." "What's wrong?" "Just come. And bring your camera." When I get to the ridge, Maria is standing next to a tree about 20 feet from where we found the bodies. The tree is on fire. Not all of it. Just a section of the trunk, maybe 3 feet tall. The bark is burning with small blue flames that don't make any smoke. The flames move like they're alive, crawling up and down the trunk. "How long has it been burning?" I ask. 2 hours. I've been watching it. The flames don't get bigger or smaller. They don't spread. They just burn. I take pictures. In the photos, the flames look white instead of blue, like they're not really flames at all. Did you try to put it out? Watch this. Maria picks up her water bottle and pours it on the flames. The water turns to steam before it touches the tree. The flames keep burning. We try dirt. We try sand. We even try the foam from my fire extinguisher. Nothing works. The flames just burn through everything like it's not there. This isn't possible, I say. I know. As we watch, more trees start burning. Always the same way. Small blue flames that don't spread or smoke. Within an hour, a dozen trees are burning, all in a rough circle around where we found the bodies. That's when we hear it. A sound like wind, but there's no wind. A sound like fire crackling, but louder. Much louder. It's coming from deeper in the forest, up the ridge. We should go, Maria says. Yeah. But as we're walking back to the trucks, I see something that makes me stop. There's a person standing between the trees up ahead, tall and thin and perfectly still. Bill? I call out. The figure doesn't move. I take a step closer. Bill, is that you? Maria grabs my arm. John, Bill's dead. We put him in a body bag yesterday. I know that, but the figure looks like Bill, same height. Same way of standing with one shoulder higher too. Hand the other. Hey, I yell. The figure turns toward us. Even from 50 yards away, I can see it's not Bill. It's not anybody. The face is wrong, too long, and where the eyes should be, there are just black holes. It starts walking toward us. Run, Maria says. We run. Behind us, I hear that crackling sound getting louder. When I look back, the figure is gone. But the trees where it was standing are now covered in those blue flames. All of them. Burning without smoke, burning without spreading, burning in a way that fire is not supposed to burn. In the truck, Maria is shaking. What was that thing? I don't know. It looked like Bill. It wasn't Bill. We drive down the mountain in silence, but I keep checking my mirrors, expecting to see that tall figure walking behind us, following us home. That night, I call my Uncle Robert. He's Cherokee, married to my dad's sister. He knows the old stories. Uncle Robert, you ever hear about fire spirits in these mountains? Why are you asking, John? I tell him what we found. The bodies, the tracks, the blue flames, the figure that looked like Bill. Uncle Robert is quiet for a long time. John, he says finally, you need to stay away from that ridge. What is it? The Cherokee called it the drought walker. It sleeps deep in the mountains, but when the forest gets too dry, when the natural fire cycle gets broken, it wakes up. What does it want? It hunts the people who fight fire. It thinks you're disturbing the natural order. Fire is supposed to burn, John. When people stop it, when they put it out again and again, the spirit gets angry. That's just a story, Uncle Robert. Is it? 6 men are dead, and you saw something that looked like one of them walking around. You saw a fire that water won't put out. Still think it's just a story? After I hang up, I sit on my porch and look up at the mountains. Somewhere up there, in the dry forest, something is awake. Something that's been sleeping for years, maybe decades. Something that knows who I am and what I do for a living. Something that's hunting people like me. 2 days later, 3 more firefighters die. They were working a small brush fire about 5 miles from Widowmaker Ridge. Standard stuff, the kind of fire we put out every week during dry season. But when the backup crew arrived, they found Tommy Walsh, Dave Miller, and Jake Harrison burned to death in the middle of a stream. In a stream. In water 2 feet deep. Their gear melted, the crew chief tells me over the radio. But the water around them is fine. No steam, no boiling. Just 3 dead men standing in a creek. I drive over with Maria. The scene looks like someone dropped 3 campfires into the middle of running water. The men are burned down to bone, but the stream keeps flowing around their legs like nothing happened. Water temperature is normal, Maria says, checking her thermometer. But the air around the bodies is reading 140 degrees. I wade into the stream. The water is cool on my legs, but when I get close to the bodies, it feels like opening an oven door. The heat hits my face in waves. John, look at this. Maria is pointing at the bank of the stream. There are more of those footprints, the big ones, burned into the mud. We follow the tracks. They lead up the bank, through a stand of pine trees, and stop at the edge of a small clearing. In the center of the clearing, something impossible is happening. The ground is on fire, not the grass or the leaves on top of it, the dirt itself. Blue flames are coming up out of the earth like it's made of gas instead of soil. The flames reach about 3 feet high and dance in patterns that hurt to look at. Gas leak, I say, but I don't believe it anymore. John, Maria's voice is tight. Look at the trees. Around the clearing, every tree is dying. The bark is turning black and peeling off. The leaves are shriveling up like they're being cooked from the inside. But there's no fire on them. They're just dying from heat that's coming from nowhere. That's when we see it. Standing in the flames, like the fire is its natural home, is the thing that looked like Bill. But now I can see it clearly, and it's not Bill at all. It's tall, maybe 8 feet, and thin like a person who hasn't eaten in months. Its skin looks like charcoal, black and cracked. Where its face should be, there are just empty holes that glow like coals. It's looking right at us. Maria, we need to leave. Now. But Maria isn't moving. She's staring at the thing with her mouth open. It's beautiful, she whispers. What? Can't you see? The way the flames move. It's like a dance. I grab her arm. She's burning hot to the touch like she has a fever. Maria, snap out of it. She blinks and looks at me. What happened? Why are we here? The thing in the fire starts walking toward us. Each step it takes leaves a burning footprint in the ground. The air around it shimmers with heat. We run. Behind us I hear that crackling sound again, but now it sounds different. Like laughter. Like something that finds our fear funny. We make it to the truck, but when I try to start it, nothing happens. The engine won't turn over. I pop the hood. All the rubber parts have melted. My radio, Maria says. She tries to call for help, but all that comes out is static and something that might be voices talking in a language that sounds like fire crackling. We walk, I say. It takes us 2 hours to get back to the main road. The whole time I feel like something is following us, staying just out of sight in the trees. The temperature keeps getting hotter, even though the sun is going down. When we finally make it to town, Maria collapses. Her skin is red like a sunburn, and she's running a fever of 104 degrees. The doctors at the hospital say it's heat stroke, but I know better. That night, while Maria is in the hose, Spittle, I get a call from Tom Bradley, the state fire marshal. John, I just got the lab results back on those soil samples. And they're impossible. The dirt from the burn areas has been heated to over 2,000 degrees. That's hot enough to melt copper. But the surrounding soil is normal. What does that mean? It means something created incredibly intense heat in a very small area, without any fuel source. John, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've never seen anything like it. What's your official report going to say? Long pause. Equipment malfunction. Probably a buried gas line that we haven't found yet. But you don't believe that. No. But I can't put killed by a fire demon in an official report. I'd lose my job. After I hang up, I drive out to my Uncle Robert's house. It's almost midnight, but he's waiting on his porch like he knew I was coming. It's getting stronger, he says before I can say anything. How do you know? The whole Cherokee community is talking about it. People are having dreams about fire that walks, dreams about something hunting in the mountains. How do I stop it? Uncle Robert shakes his head. You don't stop it, John. It's a force of nature. It's what happens when people interfere with fire for too long. Then what do I do? You respect it. You give it what it wants. What does it want? For people to stop fighting fire, for the natural cycle to return, for the forest to burn when it needs to burn. I can't do that. It's my job. It's my life. Then it's going to hunt you until you're dead. The next morning, I get a call that changes everything. The thing killed Bill Hendrick's replacement crew, all 5 of them. But this time, it didn't just burn them. It arranged their bodies in a circle, like they were having a meeting. Their equipment was melted into twisted metal sculptures, and in the center of the circle, burned into the ground, was a message. 2 words in letters 3 feet tall. Stop fighting. That's when I understand. This isn't just some angry spirit. It's trying to communicate. It wants me to know why it's killing people, and it wants me to be the one to deliver the message. I go back to Widowmaker Ridge alone. Maria is still in the hospital with her fever. Tom Bradley has gone back to Atlanta and won't answer my calls. The other firefighters are too scared to go near the mountains. Can't blame them. 9 people are dead, and we don't even know how to fight this thing. But I need to face it. Need to understand what it wants. The drive up feels different this time. The forest is completely quiet. No birds, no insects, no wind. The trees look sick, like they're slowly cooking from the inside. The air tastes like smoke even though there's no fire I can see. When I get to the ridge, it's waiting for me. The thing that looks like a person stands in the exact spot where we found Bill's crew. But now I can see it clearly, and it's not trying to hide anymore. It's about 15 feet tall and made of living fire. Not covered in fire, made of fire. Its body is flames that move like muscles under skin. Its eyes are holes that burn white hot. When it walks, its feet leave pools of melted rock. You came, it says, and its voice sounds like a forest burning. I try to speak, but nothing comes out. My throat is dry as paper. You are John Ravenshollow, it says. Your father was David Ravenshollow. He died fighting fire that was meant to burn. That's right. For 3 generations, your people have fought the natural order, have stopped fire from doing what fire must do. The forest suffers, the cycle breaks, the land grows sick. I look around. It's right. The forest does look sick. We've been putting out every fire for so long that dead wood has piled up like kindling. The natural burns that clean the forest floor and let new growth start, we've stopped them all. But people die if we don't fight fires, I say. People die when they build where fire lives, when they ignore fire's nature, when they think they can control what cannot be controlled. The creature moves closer. The heat coming off it is incredible. My clothes start to smoke. You will stop, it says. You will let fire burn as it should burn, or I will kill every person who fights fire in these mountains. I can't do that. It's my job. People depend on me. The creature laughs, and the sound is like trees exploding in flame. Your father said the same thing. Before I burned him. Everything stops. The world goes quiet. What did you say? David Ravenshollow, 18 years ago. He fought a fire that was meant to burn, a fire that would have cleaned the forest and made it healthy. He died because he would not listen. My father didn't die in an accident. He was murdered by this thing. Rage fills me up like hot water. You killed my father? I killed a man who fought the natural order, just as I kill all who fight what cannot be fought. I want to attack it, want to find some way to hurt it like it hurt my family. But what do you do against something made of fire? How do you fight heat itself? You have a choice, the creature says. Stop fighting fire and live. Continue fighting fire and die like your father died. And if I stop, what happens to the towns, the people in the forest? They learn to live with fire, as people did for thousands of years before your kind decided they could control nature. I think about my father, about how he died trying to save people, about Maria in the hospital with a fever that won't break, about 9 good people burned to ash. I think about what my job means to me. It's not just work, It's who I am. It's what makes me a Raven's Hollow. No, I say. The creature tilts its head like it doesn't understand. I said no. I won't stop fighting fires. If people are in danger, I'll fight fire. That's what my father would do. That's what a Raven's Hollow does. The creature grows taller. The heat gets so intense that the metal buttons on my shirt start to glow. Then you will die. Maybe, but not without a fig. That's when I remember what Uncle Robert told me. About Cherokee fire ceremonies, about how the tribe used to work with fire instead of against it, how they would make offerings to the fire spirits to keep them happy. I reach into my pocket and pull out my father's old Zippo lighter, the one thing of his I've carried for 18 years. Wait, I say. Before you kill me, I want to make an offering. The creature stops. What offering? I hold up the lighter. This belonged to my father. It's been in our family for 30 years. It's made fire whenever we needed it. It's part of our work, part of who we are. I flick it open. The flame springs up, tiny and blue against the massive fire creature in front of me. I offer this fire to you, I say, using words I remember from Uncle Robert's stories. I ask for your wisdom. I ask to understand. The creature reaches out with one burning hand. When it touches the lighter, something incredible happens. The small flame from the Zippo grows. It flows up the creature's arm and into its body. And suddenly, I can see everything. I see the forest as it was meant to be. I see fire moving through it in natural cycles, burning away dead wood, creating meadows where animals can graze, making room for new trees to grow. I see a living system where fire is not the enemy, but the gardener. I see what we've done wrong, how our fear of fire has made the forest sick, how stopping every burn has created conditions for massive, deadly fires that kill everything instead of cleaning and renewing. I see my father, 18 years ago, fighting a fire that should have been allowed to burn. I see the creature trying to warn him, trying to make him understand. I see my father refusing to listen, and I see the choice I have to make. I understand, I whisper. The vision fades. The creature is looking at me with those burning eyes. Will you stop fighting all fire? It asks. No, but I'll learn to work with fire. I'll let the good burns happen. I'll help people understand that some fire is necessary. The creature considers this. And when fire needs to burn, you will not stop it? If it's safe, if it's natural, if it's helping the forest, yes. And you will teach other firefighters to do the same? I'll try. The creature nods slowly. This is acceptable. But know this, John Raven's Hollow. If you break this agreement, I will return. And next time, I will not offer you a choice. The heat begins to fade. The creature starts to shrink back into the earth, like flames dying down. Wait, I call out. What about the people who died? What about Maria? Those who died fought against nature's will. But the woman, she may live if she learns as you have learned. The creature sinks into the ground like water soaking into soil. The last thing I see is those burning eyes watching me, remembering me. Then I'm alone on the ridge. The forest is still quiet, but it feels different now. Not sick, just waiting. Maria recovered. It took 2 weeks, but her fever broke and she came home from the hospital. She doesn't remember much about seeing the creature, but she dreams about fire that dances. We had a long talk about what happened, about what I learned, about the choice I made. So we stop fighting all fires? She asked. No, we get smarter about which fires to fight. We let the natural burns happen when they're safe. We teach people that fire isn't always the enemy. It wasn't easy. The State Fire Service didn't understand at first. Why would experienced firefighters suddenly start letting some fires burn? But when I showed them the research, how natural burns prevent the big deadly fires, they began to listen. We started a new program, controlled burns during safe weather, education for people who live in the forest, working with the Cherokee Nation to understand traditional fire management. Some people called us crazy, said we'd lost our nerve after what happened on Widowmaker Ridge, the Oahu. Official report blamed the deaths on equipment failures and underground gas pockets. People wanted someone to blame, but how do you blame a force of nature? I never went back to the ridge. But sometimes, on very dry nights when the forest gets that waiting feeling, I drive up the mountain roads. I stop at the edge of the wilderness and listen. Sometimes I hear it, that crackling sound that might be fire, might be laughter. A reminder that something old lives in these mountains, something that remembers when fire was sacred. Last month, a developer wanted to build houses near Widowmaker Ridge. The Cherokee Nation and the Forestry Service both said no. The land is protected now, not because of what the officials know, but because of what they don't know. Sometimes ignorance is the best protection. I still fight fires, but now I choose my battles. I save houses and towns and people. But when fire wants to clean the forest, when the burn is natural and necessary, I let it happen. I've taught other firefighters to do the same. Maria left firefighting. She teaches fire science now at the university. She tells her students about fire ecology, about how some ecosystems need fire to stay healthy. She doesn't tell them about what we saw on the ridge. Some truths are too big for classrooms. Sometimes I get calls from other places. Other states where firefighters have died in impossible ways. Places where fire behaves like it's alive. I go there and I talk to people. I tell them what I learned. Some listen, some don't. The ones who don't usually end up dead. People ask me if I'm scared of fire now. The answer is yes and no. I'm scared of fighting fire when I should be working with it. I'm scared of ignoring what the forest needs. But I'm not scared of the creature anymore. We have an understanding. As long as I keep my part of the bargain, it stays quiet. Sleeping somewhere deep, in the mountains, waiting for the next time someone forgets that fire is older than people, older than towns, older than the idea that nature can be controlled. My father's Zippo sits on my desk now. I don't carry it anymore. It served its purpose that day on the ridge. It taught me that sometimes the smallest flame can light the way to understanding. The Cherokee have a saying, fire is the first teacher. It teaches us about destruction, but also about renewal, about clearing away the old to make room for the new, about respect for forces bigger than ourselves. I learned that lesson 18 years too late to save my father. But I learned it in time to save myself, in time to save Maria, in time to save the forest. The drought broke last year. We got more rain than we'd seen in decades. The forest is green again, healthy again. The natural fire cycle is starting to return, but I know it's still there. The drought walker, sleeping in the deep places, waiting, watching, making sure that people remember their place in the natural order. And if they forget, well, fire is a teacher that some people only learn from once. Some people never learn at all. Those people burn. My name is Benjamin Crowder, and I've been pulling people out of caves for 17 years now. Folks around Jefferson National Forest know me as the guy you call when someone goes missing underground. I've rescued over 200 people from caves, mine shafts, and rock falls. Lost my own brother Tommy to a mine collapse when I was 12, so I guess you could say this work chose me. I'm telling you this so you'll believe what I'm about to say, because what happened in Devil's Throat Cave last October still wakes me up screaming some nights. It started on a Tuesday morning when Sheriff Daniels called about 3 missing college kids, students from the University of Virginia, geology majors doing some kind of rock study in the cave system beneath Wolf Ridge. Their names were Sarah Chen, Michael Torres, and Jennifer Walsh. Good kids, according to their professor. Smart, careful, experienced with cave work. They'd been missing for 18 hours. Devil's Throat sits about 40 miles from the nearest town, deep in the Mount Pleasant wilderness. The Cherokee used to call that whole area the place where bones are swallowed. But I never put much stock in old stories. Caves are dangerous enough without adding ghost tales to the mix. The morning was cold and gray when I met up with Carl Whitman at the cave entrance. Carl's been doing cave rescue even longer than me. 20 years of pulling folks out of tight spots. He's like a father to me. taught me everything I know about rope work and underground safety. With him was Danny Hicks, a volunteer from the local fire department. Good kid, maybe 25, eager to help, but still green when it came to serious cave work. "What do we know about these students?" I asked Carl as we checked our gear. "They were mapping the lower passages," Carl said, adjusting his headlamp. "Professor said they had enough supplies for 2 days. All the right equipment, rope, lights, emergency food." He shook his head. "They were supposed to check in yesterday evening." The cave entrance looked like a wound in the mountainside, a jagged opening about 6 feet wide that disappeared into darkness. I'd been in Devil's Throat maybe a dozen times over the years, always for rescues. It's a deep system, goes down at least 400 feet through limestone passages that twist and branch like a tree root turned upside down. "Radio check," I said, testing our communications. Static crackled back from base camp. "We'll lose contact around 200 feet down," Carl warned Danny. "After that, we're on our own until we come back up." I strapped on my gear, Petzl headlamp with carbide backup, emergency oxygen, first aid kit, 300 feet of 11mm static rescue rope. Everything I'd carried on hundreds of rescues before. But something felt different this time. The air coming up from the cave was too warm for October, and it had a strange metallic taste. "You smell that?" Danny asked. Carl sniffed the air. "Probably just minerals. These limestone caves can get pretty funky." As we descended the main shaft, our headlamps cutting through the darkness, I noticed something odd. Usually you can hear your echo bounce around in a cave this size. But here, our voices seemed to get swallowed up, like the darkness was drinking the sound. About 50 feet down, Danny found the first piece of equipment. "Hey, look at this," he called out, holding up a broken headlamp. The plastic was cracked and the metal parts were bent in ways that didn't make sense. What could do this to a headlamp? I examined it closer. The battery case was crushed completely flat, but the weird part was how clean the break was, almost like something with incredible strength had just squeezed it until it popped. "Rockfall, maybe?" Carl suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. We kept going deeper, following the main passage as it curved and dropped through the limestone. The temperature kept getting warmer, which was all wrong. Caves are supposed to stay the same temperature year-round, usually around 50 degrees, but it felt like 70 down here, maybe more. At 100 feet, we found more equipment scattered around, a compass with its needle spinning wildly, a rope that had been cut clean through, a water bottle that looked like it had been put in a vise. "This doesn't make sense," Danny muttered, picking up pieces of what used to be a headlamp. "What happened to these kids?" That's when we heard the first sound. It came from deeper in the cave, echoing up through the passages. A low grinding noise like millstones turning against each other. But there was something else mixed in with it, a sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. It sounded like screaming. "Did you hear that?" Danny whispered. Carl and I exchanged looks. In 20 years of cave work, you learn to tell the difference between wind sounds, water dripping, and rock settling. This was none of those things. "Probably just air moving through the passages," Carl said, but his voice was tight. "These old cave systems can make all kinds of weird noises." The grinding sound came again, longer this time, followed by what sounded like something heavy being dragged across rock. My radio crackled with static, even though we were still above the cutoff point. "Base camp, this is Benjamin. Radio check." Nothing but white noise came back. We kept moving down, following what looked like the main passage. The students' equipment was scattered everywhere now. Pieces of rope, broken lights, a backpack with its contents spilled out. But it wasn't random. There was a pattern to it, like something had been sorting through their gear and tossing aside what it didn't want. "Look at this," Danny said, kneeling next to a section of cave wall. His light played across strange marks scratched into the limestone, long gouges about 3 inches apay, burnt, like claw marks. But they went deep into solid rock, deeper than any animal could scratch. "What kind of bear could do that?" he asked. "No bear," I said. running my fingers along the marks. The limestone was smooth inside the gouges, polished almost. These look old, too. Real old. Carl was examining the cave floor with his light. Ben, you need to see this. Where his beam hit the ground, I could see something that made my stomach drop. Scattered across the rocky floor was a fine white powder. At first I thought it was limestone dust, but when I knelt down and looked closer, I realized what it was. Bone powder, ground so fine it was almost like flour. Jesus, Danny breathed, backing away from the pile. Is that human? I said quietly. I'd seen enough accidents in my 17 years to recognize bone dust when I saw it. Something ground these bones up. The grinding sound echoed up from deeper in the cave again, and this time there was no mistaking the screaming mixed in with it. High-pitched, desperate, and definitely human. One of the students is still alive, Carl said, grabbing his rope. We need to move. Now. We rappelled down the next drop fast, maybe too fast, but that screaming was getting under my skin. It would start, go on for maybe 10 seconds, then cut off suddenly. Then silence for a few minutes. Then it would start again. At 200 feet down, we hit a chamber I'd never seen before. It was huge. Our lights couldn't find the far wall or the ceiling, but the strangest thing was the formations. Limestone caves usually have stalactites and stalagmites, flowstone, maybe some crystals. This place had structures that looked almost like buildings, tall spires of white stone that curved and twisted in patterns that hurt to look at. And they were warm. Not just warm. Hot to the touch. This is impossible, Danny said, pulling his hand back from one of the formations. Rock doesn't generate heat like this. That's when I noticed the bone powder wasn't just scattered randomly anymore. Someone, or something, had arranged it in patterns between the rock spires. Spirals and circles, like some kind of writing. And in the center of each pattern was a small pile of larger bone fragments. Teeth. Human teeth. We need to get out of here, I said. Right now. But Carl was already moving deeper into the chamber, following his light toward what looked like another passage. The screaming's coming from that way. If there's a chance one of those kids is still alive. He was right, and we all knew it. You don't abandon people. That's the first rule of rescue work. The passage led down again, curving through the limestone in a spiral pattern. The walls here were smooth, too smooth. They looked almost melted, like something had heated the rock until it flowed. And they were covered in that same bone powder, but here it was packed into the rock like cement. The screaming came again, closer now. But there was something wrong with the sound. It echoed too much, like it was coming from everywhere at once. Danny, I called back. You still there? No answer. Carl and I both turned around, shining our lights back up the passage. Empty. No sign of Danny anywhere. Danny! Carl shouted. His voice bounced off the walls and came back distorted, almost like laughter. Danny! That's when we heard Danny screaming. It was coming from above us, from somewhere in the ceiling. But that was impossible. The ceiling was solid limestone, no cracks big enough for a person to fit through. Help me! Danny's voice echoed down to us, muffled like he was calling from inside a box. Something's got me! Something's dragging me! I aimed my light up at the ceiling. There, about 20 feet above us, I could see a crack in the rock. It was maybe 4 inches wide, not big enough for a mouse, let alone a grown man. But Danny's voice was definitely coming from inside it. How the hell did he get in there? Carl whispered, a scream. Aiming stopped suddenly. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. Then something started grinding again. Right above our heads, rock dust rained down on us, and I could swear I heard bones breaking. That's when I knew we weren't dealing with any kind of accident or animal attack. Something was hunting in these caves, something that could do impossible things, and we were next. Carl grabbed my shoulder. We're getting out. Now! But when we turned to go back up the passage, our lights hit something that made us both freeze. The smooth walls were moving. Not fast, but steady, like the rock was flowing like thick mud. The passage we'd just come through was getting narrower. It's closing, Carl said, his voice barely a whisper. "The cave is closing." I pressed my hand against the wall. It was hot, almost too hot to touch, and I could feel it moving under my palm. Solid limestone was somehow flowing like liquid, sealing us in. "There," I said, pointing my light toward a narrow opening I hadn't noticed before. "Another way out." We squeezed through the gap just as the main passage sealed shut behind us. My radio was nothing but static now, and my compass was spinning like a carnival ride. We were completely cut off. The new passage was different from anything I'd seen in 17 years of cave work. The walls were covered in those same claw marks, but here they formed patterns, almost like words in a language I didn't recognize. And the bone powder was everywhere, packed into the scratches until they looked like white veins running through the dark rock. "Ben," Carl said quietly, "look at the floor." I aimed my light down and saw tracks, not human tracks. These were long grooves in the stone, like something huge had been dragged across the rock. But the grooves were deep, cut right into solid limestone. We followed the tracks deeper, because what choice did we have? The grinding sound was constant now, coming from all around us. Sometimes it would get louder, sometimes softer, but it never stopped. And underneath it, I could hear other sounds. Wet sounds, crunching sounds. "What is that smell?" Carl asked. He was right. There was a smell now, getting stronger as we went deeper, sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in water. But underneath that was something else, something that reminded me of the time I'd found a deer that had been dead for weeks. The passage opened into another chamber, bigger than the last one. Our lights couldn't find the edges, but we could see more of those twisted stone formations rising up from the floor. Only now I could see they weren't natural formations at all. They were nests, built from bones. Human bones, all ground up and mixed with something that made them stick together like cement. The nests rose up in spirals, 20 feet high or more, with openings near the top like windows. And from inside those openings, I could see light. Not electric light, something organic, pulsing like a heartbeat, green-white and cold, like the glow you see on rotten wood sometimes. "Dear God," Carl breathed. That's when we found what was left of the students. Their gear was sorted into neat piles between the bone nests, headlamps, rope, backpacks, all arranged with the same weird precision we'd been seeing. But the students themselves. I found Jennifer Walsh first, or what the things had left of her. She was stuck to the side of one of the nests, wrapped in some kind of white material that looked like spider silk but thicker. Only her face was showing, and her eyes were still moving, still aware. "Help," she whispered when she saw our lights. Her voice was barely human, more like air leaking out of a broken tire. "Please." Carl was beside me, working at the white material with his knife. "We're going to get you out of here, honey. Just hold on." But when he cut through the wrapping, we both stepped back in horror. Everything below her neck was gone. Not cut off, dissolved. Like acid had eaten away everything but bone, and even the bones were partially gone. Jennifer Walsh was still alive, still conscious, but there was almost nothing left of her. "Kill me," she whispered. "Please. It's been eating me for hours." I couldn't do it. 17 years of saving people, and I couldn't kill someone who was begging me to end her suffering. My hands were shaking too bad to even hold my knife steady. Carl did it for me, quick and clean, like putting down a suffering animal. Jennifer's eyes closed, and she was finally at peace. "The other two," I said. "We have to find the other two." We found Michael Torres in the next nest over. He was in the same condition as Jennifer, wrapped in that white material, partially dissolved, but still alive, still aware. Carl didn't hesitate this time. Sarah Chen was in the third nest, but she was different. She was unconscious, and when Carl cut her free, we saw that she was still whole. Hurt bad, her leg was broken, and she had cuts and bruises all over, but she was intact. Why didn't it eat her? Carl wondered. I was looking at the green-white glow coming from inside the nests when I realized the truth. It's not eating them, it's farming them. The glow was getting brighter, and the grinding sounds were getting closer. It keeps them alive, I continued, helping Carl lift Sarah's unconscious body. Eats them slowly, keeps them fresh, like keeping meat in the refrigerator. That's when we saw it. The thing came down from the ceiling like a massive worm, 12 feet long and as thick as a tree trunk. Its skin was pale and wet, covered in what looked like crystalline teeth that ran the length of its body. But the worst part was how it moved, flowing through solid rock like it was water, leaving smooth tunnels behind it. The creature's head was nothing but a circular mouth filled with rows of ding teeth that never stopped moving. That's where the sound had been coming from. It was always eating, always grinding, always hungry. Carl raised his emergency flare and fired it right at the thing's mouth. The creature recoiled from the bright light, letting out a sound that was part scream, part grinding stone. But it didn't retreat. Instead, it started circling us, moving through the cave walls like they weren't even there. "The light," I said. "It doesn't like the light." We had maybe 6 flares between us, plus our headlamps and the emergency flashlights. Not much against something that could burrow through solid limestone. The creature came at us again, this time from the floor. Carl dove left. I dove right. Sarah still unconscious in my arms. The thing's grinding mouth missed us by inches, but its passage left a perfectly round tunnel in the rock where we'd been standing. "The entrance passage," Carl shouted, firing another flare. "We need to get back to the entrance." But as we looked around the chamber, I realized the horrible truth. There was no entrance passage anymore. The creature had sealed every opening while we'd been rescuing Sarah. The smooth walls pressed in on all sides, unbroken stone with no way out. We were trapped in a bone nest with something that could eat through solid rock, and we were its next meal. The creature circled us like a shark, moving through the limestone walls as easy as swimming through water. Every time it passed through solid rock, it left behind a tunnel just wide enough for its body, and those tunnels stayed hot for minutes afterward, glowing faint red in the darkness. "It's not just burrowing," I told Carl as we huddled back to back, Sarah between us. "It's melting the rock somehow." Carl fired another flare at the creature as it emerged from the ceiling above us. The bright light made it retreat back into the stone, but we were down to 3 flares now, and my headlamp was already getting dimmer. That's when Sarah woke up. She looked around the bone chamber with the wide eyes of someone who'd lived through hell and was still stuck in it. "You came back for us," she whispered. "We're all getting out of here," I told her, though I didn't believe it myself anymore. "No," she said, struggling to sit up. "You don't understand. It's not just one creature. This whole cave system, it's not a cave at all. It's the creature. We're inside it." I stared at her. "That's impossible." The passages that change shape, the walls that move, the heat. Sarah's voice was getting stronger. "We're inside its digestive system. Those bone nests, they're not nests. They're collection points. It grinds up its food and stores the calcium here." The grinding sound was getting closer again. The creature was coming back. "How do we kill something this big?" Carl asked, checking his remaining flares. "You don't," Sarah said. "But maybe you can hurt it enough to make it let us out." She pointed to her backpack, still intact in one of the equipment piles. "I had dynamite. We were using small charges to break rock samples. If we could get to a vital area." The creature burst out of the floor right next to us. Its circular mouth opened like a flower made of knives, and the grinding sound was deafening. I rolled away, pulling Sarah with me, while Carl hit it with a flare at point-blank range. The thing screamed, not with sound, but with vibrations that shook the entire chamber. Rock dust rained down from the ceiling, and hairline cracks appeared in the bone nests. "There," Sarah pointed to where the creature had retreated back into the wall. "You see how the rock glowed red where it went in? That's nerve tissue. This whole chamber is part of its nervous system." I understood. We were in the creature's brain. While Carl kept watch, I crawled to Sarah's backpack and found 3 sticks of dynamite with a simple timer detonator. Not much, but maybe enough to give this thing a headache it wouldn't. And to forget. The creature came at us again, this time from 3 different directions at once. I realized there wasn't just one of these worms. There were several, all part of the same massive organism, like fingers on a hand. Carl used our second-to-last flare to drive off the one coming from the left. I tackled the one emerging from the right, jamming the lit dynamite into its grinding mouth. The third one got Sarah. I heard her scream as those crystalline teeth closed around her leg, and then the creature was pulling her into the wall. But instead of taking her into solid rock, it dragged her toward one of the bone nests. "It's taking her to process her," Carl shouted, "like the others." I had maybe 10 seconds before the dynamite went off. Carl had 1 flare left, and Sarah was disappearing into a grinding mouth that would keep her alive while it slowly dissolved her body over hours or days. I made the hardest decision of my life. I grabbed Carl's last flare and dove into the creature's mouth after Sarah. The grinding stopped. The creature couldn't risk crushing its own internal structures with me and the lit flare inside its digestive tract. I felt myself sliding down a smooth tunnel, the walls pulsing around me like I was inside a giant throat. Sarah was just ahead of me, unconscious but breathing. I grabbed her and braced myself against the tunnel walls just as the dynamite went off. The explosion shook the entire cave system. The creature's scream was beyond sound. It was pure vibration that rattled my bones and made my ears bleed. The tunnel we were in convulsed violently, and I felt us being pushed upward. The creature was vomiting us out. We shot up through passages that changed shape as we moved, the living rock spitting us out like bad food. My flare went out and we were in complete darkness, but I could feel wind on my face. Real wind, not the stale air of the deep caves. We hit daylight so suddenly, it was like being born again. Carl found us 20 minutes later, crawling out of a crack in the hillside, 100 yards from the original cave entrance. The main opening to Devil's Throat had collapsed completely, sealed with tons of rock that looked like it had been melted and reformed. "The creature?" he asked. I looked back at the sealed hillside. Deep underground, I could still hear grinding sounds, but they were different now. Slower. Pained. "Hurt," I said, "but not dead. Nothing that big dies easy." Sarah had 3 broken ribs and a shattered leg, but she was alive. We got her to the hospital, and she recovered. But she never talks about what happened in the caves. Neither do I, usually. The official report said it was a cave-in caused by unstable limestone formations. 3 University of Virginia students lost in a tragic accident. That's what the newspapers printed, and that's what people believe. But I know the truth. It's been 18 months since Devil's Throat, and I haven't been in a cave since. Can't do it. Soon as I get more than 10 feet underground, the sweats start, and I can't breathe. Carl says it'll pass, but I don't think so. I think my body knows things my mind is trying to forget. I quit the Forest Service 3 months after the incident. Told them I was ready to try something new, maybe work construction or logging, anything that keeps me above ground. These days I run a small hardware store in town, selling rope and camping gear to people who still think the mountains are safe. Sarah moved back to California. She sends me a Christmas card every year with a picture of the ocean on it. Never any message inside, just her signature. I think she understands that some experiences are too big for words. Carl still does rescue work. He's the only one left with enough experience to handle the serious calls. But he tells me he's gotten careful about which caves he'll enter. Says some places just feel wrong now, and he trusts his instincts more than he used to. The state sealed off 3 more cave systems in the area after our report. Not because they believed our story, they didn't, but because other people started going missing. A couple of rock climbers last spring, a family of hikers in July. The official explanation is always the same: unstable rock formations, dangerous conditions, tragic accidents. But the locals know better. They've started avoiding the whole Wolf Ridge area. Property values dropped so far that the county stopped assessing taxes on some of the remote parcels. You can buy 100 acres of mountain land for almost nothing now, as long as you don't mind the neighbors. The Cherokee were right about this place. It swallows bones. I still have nightmares about the grinding sound. Sometimes I wake up thinking I can hear it coming up through the floor of my bedroom. On those nights, I go sit on my porch and look at the stars until morning comes. Last month, a geology professor from Virginia Tech called me, said he was doing research on limestone cave systems and had heard I was an expert on the local formations, wanted to know if I'd guide his students on a mapping expedition. I told him the caves around here were too dangerous and hung up. But I've been thinking about what Sarah said, about the whole system being one creature. If that's true, if something that size is living under the mountains, then sealing off a few entrances won't stop it. It'll just make it look for new ways to feed. 3 weeks ago, Mrs. Henderson found her well water tasted funny. Metallic, she said, like old pennies. And yesterday, Tom Bradley reported that his basement was getting warmer for no reason he could figure out. I'm starting to think the creature is moving, looking for new feeding grounds. I've been to the library reading old Cherokee stories and newspaper archives from the 1800s. The pattern is always the same. Disappearances happen in one area for a few years, then that place gets avoided and the disappearances start somewhere else. Like the thing hunts out one area and then moves on. There's a cave system opening a P near Roanoke. Natural springs that have been running clear for 100 years just started tasting metallic last week, and the temperature in those caves has gone up 15 degrees since winter. I think it's time to move again. Somewhere far from mountains, far from caves. Somewhere flat, where you can see trouble coming from miles away. But sometimes, late at night when the mountain wind is blowing just right, I swear I can still hear it grinding, and I know it's still hungry. If you're reading this and you live anywhere near limestone cave country, Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, anywhere in Appalachia, listen to me. Stay out of unmarked caves. If you find a cave that feels warm inside, get out immediately. If your well water starts tasting like metal, don't ignore it. And if you ever hear grinding sounds coming from underground, don't investigate. Just run. The Cherokee knew what they were talking about. Some places in this world are meant to swallow bones. Don't give them yours. My name is Margaret Stoneheart, but everyone calls me Maggie. I've been a park ranger here in the Great Smoky Mountains for 14 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these old mountains could throw at me. Black bears getting into camper food, tourists falling off cliffs taking selfies, the occasional wild boar charging hikers. Normal stuff. Dangerous, sure, but normal. I have a PhD in wildlife biology. I study animals for a living. I know how they think, how they move, how they hunt. I can tell you the difference between coyote tracks and dog tracks from 50 feet away. I can spot signs of a rabid raccoon before it even shows symptoms. After all these years in these woods, I figured there wasn't much that could surprise me anymore. Boy, was I wrong. It started on a cold morning in March 1987. The spring fog was so thick you could barely see 20 feet ahead of you. I was sitting in my truck at the Cades Cove Ranger Station, drinking coffee from my thermos and going over my notes from the night before. The radio crackled to life. "Maggie, you there?" It was Dave Morrison, my partner. Dave's an enforcement ranger, former military guy who's been working these mountains almost as long as me. "Yeah, Dave, what's up?" "Got some hikers at the emergency phone near Thunderhead. They're pretty shook up. Claim they were attacked by a pack of kids last night." I nearly choked on my coffee. Kids? That's what they said. Wild children, living in the woods. Stole their food, scattered their gear. The woman's got some nasty scratches on her arms. I sighed and started my truck. Probably just some local teenagers messing around. You know how kids get during spring break. Maybe, but Maggie, these folks aren't your typical weekend warriors. They're experienced backpackers, been hiking these mountains for 20 years. They know the difference between kids and animals. 20 minutes later, I was talking to Jim and Carol Peterson from Atlanta, both in their 50s wearing proper hiking boots and gear that had seen real use. Carol's left arm was wrapped in bandages, and Jim kept looking over his shoulder like something might jump out of the trees. It was around midnight, Jim said, his voice shaky. We had our camp set up in that flat area near the old Elijah Oliver cabin ruins. You know the spot? I nodded. It was a popular camping area, maybe 3 miles from the nearest road. Carol was already in the tent, he continued. I was banking the fire when I heard them, giggling, like children playing. At midnight? I asked. That's what I thought. I called out, Hey kids, it's late. Where are your parents? The giggling stopped. Then I heard rustling in the bushes all around us. Carol picked up the story. Her hands were shaking. Jim came into the tent and woke me up, said we weren't alone. That's when we heard them moving around our campsite. Little footsteps, whispers. Did you see them? Not at first, Jim said. But when I unzipped the tent flap to look out, God, Maggie, there were maybe 6 or 7 of them. Kids, but something was wrong. They were so pale in the moonlight and thin, really thin, like they hadn't eaten in weeks. What did they do? They just stared at us for a minute. Then one of them, a little girl maybe 8 years old, she smiled, and her teeth, he shuddered. Her teeth looked like they'd been filed to points. Carol showed me her bandaged arm. That's when they rushed us. Came at the tent like wild animals. I got these trying to keep one from getting inside. I examined the scratches through the bandage. They were deep, parallel lines. Could have been fingernails, but they looked more like claw marks. The spacing was wrong for human hands. What happened next? We fought them out to F with our hiking poles, Jim said. They scattered our gear everywhere, took all our food. Then they just disappeared. Melted back into the woods like they were never there. I spent the next hour walking their campsite. The Petersons weren't lying. Their gear was scattered in a perfect circle around their tent, like someone had grabbed everything and thrown it as far as they could. But here's what bothered me. There were tracks in the soft dirt, small bare footprints, like children's feet. But each print had what looked like claw marks at the tips. No human child has claws. I took pictures, made notes, and told the Petersons I'd investigate. They packed up and left that morning, and I don't blame them. But as I stood there in that empty campsite, looking at those strange tracks, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Fear. The woods around me were too quiet. No bird song, no squirrel chatter, no insects buzzing. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. I radioed Dave and told him what I'd found. Could be feral kids, he said. You know the stories about families getting lost in these mountains back in the 1800s. Maybe some survived, went wild. Dave, I've studied animal behavior for 20 years. Wild children don't hunt in coordinated packs, and they sure don't have claws. So what are you thinking? I looked down at those impossible footprints again. I don't know, but I'm going to find out. 3 days later, Linda Hayes called me. Linda's a volunteer tracker who helps us with search and rescue operations. She knows these mountains better than anyone, grew up in a cabin just outside the park. Her grandfather used to tell stories about the mountain's children, wild kids who lived in the old abandoned homesteads and came out at night to steal food and supplies. Maggie, you need to see this, she said over the phone. Her voice was tight with worry. I met her at the trailhead near the Elijah Oliver place. Linda was in her 60s, gray-haired and tough as leather boots. I'd seen her track pounded bears through snow and never break a sweat. But when I found her that morning, she was pale and jumpy. Found more tracks, she said without greeting, leading up toward the old Tipton cabin. But Maggie, these aren't normal. We hiked up the old logging road for about a mile. The Tipton cabin was one of those homesteads from the 1800s, abandoned when the park was created. Nothing left now but a stone chimney and some rotting logs. The kind of place that feels sad and empty even on sunny days. Linda showed me the tracks in a muddy patch near what used to be the cabin's front door. More small footprints, but these were different, deeper, like whatever made them was carrying something heavy. There's more, Linda said, leading me around back of the ruins. That's where I saw it. Hanging from a tree branch about 8 feet off the ground was a deer. A young doe, maybe a year old. But it wasn't hanging like a hunter would hang a deer. It was upside down, tied by the back legs with what looked like strips of bark. And it had been opened. Not gutted cleanly like a hunter would do it. Torn open, like something had used its hands to pull the carcass apart. "Jesus," I whispered. "Gets worse," Linda said. She pointed to the base of the tree. Around the trunk, arranged in a perfect circle, were small bones, white and clean, picked completely bare. Rabbit bones, squirrel bones, and what looked like the remains of several birds. But they weren't scattered randomly like you'd expect from predator kills. They were placed carefully, almost decoratively. "How long has this been here?" "Can't be more than a day or two," Linda said. "That deer's still fresh." I took more pictures, collected some of the bone samples. But as we worked, I kept feeling like we were being watched. Every few minutes, I'd look up and scan the tree line, expecting to see something. But there was nev or anything there, just that unnatural quiet again. "Linda, have you ever seen anything like this?" She shook her head slowly. "My granddaddy used to say the mountain had its own children. Said they'd take young ones from families that got lost in the hard winters, raise them wild, teach them to hunt like animals. You believe that?" "Never did before." She looked up at the hanging deer. "But this ain't natural predator behavior, Maggie. No animal arranges bones like that. And no animal strings up its kill to bleed out." We were about to leave when Linda grabbed my arm. "You hear that?" I stopped and listened. At first, nothing. Then, faint but clear, the sound of children giggling. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the trees and rocks. But there was something wrong with it. It was too high, too sharp, like the sound a child might make if it was trying really hard to sound like a child. "We should go," Linda said. I nodded, but as we packed up our gear, I noticed something else. The bones around the tree were gone. Every single one. While we'd been listening to that giggling, something had taken them. We hadn't heard a sound. That night I set up 3 trail cameras around the Tipton cabin ruins. Reconics units with infrared flash, motion activated. If something was using this area as a hunting ground, I'd get pictures of it. 2 days later, I came back to check them. All 3 cameras had been destroyed, not just knocked down or stolen, smashed to pieces with rocks. The SD cards were missing, and someone had arranged the broken plastic and metal pieces in that same circular pattern I'd seen with the bones. But they'd missed something. A 4th camera I'd hidden in a dead tree about 50 yards away. When I checked the memory card, I found 63 photos taken over 2 nights. The first 40 were normal. Deer drinking from a stream, raccoons foraging, an owl hunting mice. Then in photo 41, taken at 2:17 a.m., I saw them. Children, 6 of them, standing at the edge of the camera's range. They were pale, thin, and ached despite the cold mountain air. In the infrared flash, their eyes looked white and empty like milk-filled sockets. They were holding rocks. In the next photo, they were closer. One of them, a girl who looked maybe 10 years old, was staring straight at the camera. Her mouth was open in what might have been a smile, and I could see her teeth. Jim Peterson had been right. They looked filed to points. The last 20 photos showed them systematically destroying my other cameras. They worked together like a pack of wolves, coordinated, efficient. And in every photo, those empty white eyes stared out at me with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. I called Dave immediately. "Pack up your gear," I told him. "We're going camping tonight." "Where?" "The Tipton cabin. I found them, Dave. The kids that Peterson saw. And you're not going to believe what else I found." Dave met me at the ranger station just after sunset. He'd brought his enforcement gear, radio, first aid kit, and his service weapon. I had my wildlife tranquilizer rifle and enough dart ammunition to drop a full-grown bear. "You really think we're going to need all this for some feral kids?" he asked as we loaded the truck. I showed him the photos from the trail camera. Dave's a tough guy, former Marine who did 2 tours in Vietnam. But I watched his face go pale as he flipped through the images. "Those eyes," he said quietly. "What's wrong with their eyes?" "I don't know. but look at how they're working together. That's not normal human behavior, wild or not. We drove as close to the Tipton cabin as we could, then hiked the last mile by flashlight. The plan was simple. Set up camp near the ruins and wait. If the kids came back, we'd try to communicate with them first, find out where they came from if they needed help. If they turned aggressive, we had the tranquilizer gun. It seemed like a reasonable plan at the time. We made camp about 100 yards from the cabin ruins, close enough to watch but far enough away that we wouldn't seem like a threat. Dave set up the tent while I arranged our gear. By 9 o'clock, we were sitting by a small fire, drinking coffee and waiting. "Tell me about those old families," I said, "the ones that got lost." Dave poked at the fire with a stick. Happened a lot in the early days. Scots-Irish settlers would head up into the mountains looking for good farmland. Some of them made it, built cabins, started families. But the winters up here are hard, real hard. Some years, whole families would just disappear. Come spring, other settlers would find empty cabins, half-eaten stores of food, but no bodies. What did people think happened to them? Most figured they starved or froze or got picked off by bears. But there were stories. Folks claimed they'd see children running through the woods near those abandoned places. Wild children who'd survived by eating. He trailed off. Eating what? Whatever they could find. Dave's voice was quiet, including each other. At 11:30, the giggling started. It came from all around us at once, just like Linda and I had heard before. But this time it was closer, and there was more of it. Not just one or two voices, but maybe a dozen, all giggling and whispering in the darkness beyond our firelight. "Hello?" I called out. "We're park rangers. We're here to help." The giggling stopped immediately. For about 30 seconds, the woods were completely silent. Then we heard movement in the brush. Lots of movement, like a large group circling our campsite. Dave unholstered his pistol. I picked up the tranquilizer rifle. "We know you're out there," Dave said, his voice carrying that military authority I'd heard him use with drunk campers. "Come into the light so we can talk." Something moved at the edge of our fire's glow. A small figure, maybe 4 feet tall, standing just beyond the ring of light. Then another appeared on the opposite side of our camp. Then 2 more. "That's good," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "We can see you now. Can you understand us?" One of them stepped closer. It was a girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. She was naked and so thin I could count her ribs. Her hair was long and matted, hanging down over her face. When she lifted her head to look at us, I saw those milk-white eyes from the photos. "Are you hungry?" I asked. I reached into our pack and pulled out a granola bar. "We have food." The girl tilted her head, studying me like a dog might study a new sound. Then she opened her mouth and made a noise that definitely wasn't human. It was a clicking, chittering sound, like insects talking to each other. The other figures clicked back. "Maggie," Dave whispered, "we should go." The girl took another step forward. In the firelight, I could see her face clearly now. She had been human once, I was sure of it. But something had changed her. Her skin was gray-white, stretched tight over her bones. Her fingernails had grown into claws, yellow and curved. And her teeth were definitely filed to points. She clicked again, and suddenly they were all moving toward us, not running, but walking in that coordinated way pack hunters do when they're closing in on prey. I raised the tranquilizer rifle. "Stay back!" The girl stopped and tilted her head the other way. Then she smiled, showing those pointed teeth, and spoke in a voice like a little girl trying very hard to sound like a little girl. "Are you our new mommy and daddy?" That's when Dave shot her. The gunshot echoed through the mountains like thunder. The girl stumbled backward, clutching her shoulder, but she didn't go down. Instead, she looked at the blood on her hand and started to laugh. Not giggling this time, but laughing like she'd just heard the funniest joke in the world. The others rushed us. I got one with a tranquilizer dart as it charged our camp. The drug hit its center mass and it dropped mid-stride, but the rest kept coming. Dave was shooting as fast as he could, but there were too many of them. I saw him go down under 2 of sheer. The smaller ones, their claws raking at his jacket and face. I grabbed a burning log from the fire and swung it at the nearest attacker. It shrieked and jumped back, covering its white eyes with its hands. The fire. They didn't like the fire. "Dave, get to the fire!" But Dave was busy fighting off a boy who looked maybe 12 but moved like a wild animal. The kid had his teeth clamped onto Dave's wrist, and Dave was trying to shake him off while two others climbed onto his back. I shot another dart, then another. Two more of them went down, but the rest just regrouped and started circling us again, staying just outside the firelight, waiting. "What do you want?" I shouted at them. The girl I'd shot stepped back into the light. The bullet wound in her shoulder was bleeding, but she didn't seem to care. She smiled that horrible smile again. "We're so hungry," she said in that fake child's voice. "We've been hungry for so long, but now you're here. Now we can eat." That's when I understood. These things, whatever they weren't feral children. They were something else. Something that had maybe been human once, but had become something else. Something that hunted people. And we were trapped. The fire was getting smaller. In maybe an hour, it would burn down to nothing. And then they'd come for us again. I had 4 tranquilizer darts left, and Dave had maybe 6 bullets. There were still 8 of them moving in the darkness around us. "Dave, how bad are you hurt?" He was sitting against a tree, holding his torn wrist. Blood was seeping through his fingers. "I'll live." "But Maggie, what the hell are these things?" Before I could answer, the girl spoke again. She was still standing at the edge of the firelight, watching us with those empty white eyes. "We used to be like you," she said. "We lived in the cabins with our families. But the winter was so cold and the food ran out. Mama and Papa got sick and died. We were so hungry." "How long ago was this?" I asked. She tilted her head, thinking. "Before the park rangers came. Before the roads. When only the mountain families lived here. That would make it over 50 years ago. This thing was claiming to be over 60 years old, but she looked like a child. We found the hungry place," she continued. "Deep in the mountain, where the old things sleep. It showed us how to never be hungry again, how to stay young and strong forever." "What hungry place?" "The cave where the mountain keeps its heart. It told us the secret. If you eat the right food, you never get old. You never die." She licked her lips with a tongue that was too long and too dark. "People food is the best food." Dave and I looked at each other. This was impossible. These things were claiming to be decades old, kept alive by cannibalism. But they looked like children, moved like pack animals, and had abilities no human should have. "How many people have you?" I couldn't finish the question. "Lots," said another voice from the darkness. A boy's voice, but with the same fake quality. "Campers are easy. They sleep heavy and they're soft. Rangers are harder. They have guns and they're careful, but they taste better." More clicking and chittering from the darkness around us. They were communicating, planning something. "The fire's getting low," the girl observed. "Soon we can play properly." I looked at our dwindling fire, then at the tranquilizer rifle in my hands. 4 darts left, 8 of them. The math wasn't good. "Dave, when I say run, head for the truck. Don't look back." "What about you?" "I'll buy you time." I checked my gear. In my pack, I had a road flare, the kind we use to mark accident scenes. If these things were afraid of fire, I'm not leaving you here. Someone needs to get word out, if we're both key. Yelled, nobody will know about these things. They'll keep killing campers, hikers, anyone who comes up here alone. The fire crackled and settled lower. The girl took a step closer. "Soon?" she said. I pulled the flare from my pack and held it ready. "Dave, remember what I said. When I light this, you run." "Maggie, that's an order." The fire collapsed into coals. The woods around us exploded into motion. They came from every direction at once, pale shapes moving faster than anything human should be able to move. I popped the flare, and brilliant red light blazed through the darkness. They screamed, all of them screaming like they were being burned alive. The light hit them and they scattered, covering their eyes and rolling on the ground. "Run!" Dave ran. I heard him crashing through the brush toward the trail, and I hoped he'd make it. The flare wouldn't last long. The girl was on the ground maybe 10 feet away, writhing and clutching her face. The brilliant red light was causing her skin to smoke and blister where it touched her. But even as she screamed, she was looking at me through her fingers with those milk-white eyes. "You can't stop us," she hissed. "We're the mountain's children now. We belong here. You're just food." "Maybe," I said, backing toward the trail, "but I'm food that fights back." I had maybe 2 minutes before the flare burned out. I turned and ran after Dave, crashing through the rhododendron thickets as fast as I could. Behind me I could hear them recovering, clicking, and chittering to each other, planning their pursuit. I caught up with Dave about halfway to the truck. He was bleeding badly and moving slow. "Can you make it?" "Have to," he gasped. We stumbled down the trail together, using my flashlight to find the way. Every few seconds I'd look back, expecting to see pale shapes following us. But they weren't there. Maybe the flare had hurt them worse than I thought. Maybe they were afraid of us now. I should have known better. We reached the truck and I fumbled for my keys. Dave collapsed against the passenger door. Brett, hing hard. I got the engine started and threw it in reverse, spinning gravel as I backed toward the main road. That's when they dropped from the trees. 3 of them landed on the truck's roof with wet, thudding sounds. I could hear their claws scraping against the metal as they tried to find purchase. One of them hung upside down in front of the windshield, grinning at me with those pointed teeth. I floored the accelerator and spun the wheel hard to the right. The truck skidded sideways and 2 of them flew off into the darkness. But the third one, the boy who'd bitten Dave, managed to grab onto the driver's side mirror. He was hanging there, swinging back and forth, trying to claw his way to the window. Dave leaned over and shot him in the face. The boy let go and disappeared under the truck. I felt the bump as we ran over him, but I didn't slow down. I drove as fast as I dared on the winding mountain road, checking the mirrors constantly for signs of pursuit. "Are they following us?" Dave asked. I looked back at the dark forest receding behind us. "I don't think so. I think they stay close to their territory." "Their hunting ground?" "Yeah." We drove in silence for a while. Dave was bleeding on my passenger seat, and I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the steering wheel steady. But we were alive, and we were getting farther from those things with every mile. "Maggie, what are we going to tell people? Who's going to believe this?" I thought about that. Park rangers reporting cannibalistic children who lived in caves and hunted campers. It sounded insane even to me, and I'd just lived through it. I don't know, but we have to try. The official report listed it as a rabies outbreak. Dangerous, aggressive wildlife in the Thunderhead Mountain area. The entire region was quarantined for 6 months while a military cleanup team went through the woods with dogs and did a helicopter surveillance. I don't know what they found up there or what they did about it. My security clearance wasn't high enough for those details. All I know is that 3 months later, the quarantine was lifted and the area reopened to campers. Dave never came back to work. He took early retirement and moved to Florida, as far from mountains as he could get. Can't say I blame him. Those scars on his wrist never healed quite right, and he told me he still had nightmares about children with white eyes. I transferred to a desk job in Gatlinburg. Data analysis, wildlife population surveys, safe bureaucratic work where the most dangerous thing I face is a paper cut. My supervisor thinks it's a waste of my field experience, but I sleep better at night. Sometimes, though, I still get reports that make me remember. Hikers who disappear in the backcountry areas. Campsites found destroyed, gear scattered in perfect circles. Strange sounds heard at night near the old homestead ruins. Last month, a family from Ohio called to report their missing daughter. 8-year-old Sarah Martinez disappeared while camping near Cades Cove. Search and rescue found her 3 days later, sitting by herself near the Elijah Oliver cabin ruins. She was unharmed, but wouldn't talk about where she'd been. Kept saying she'd made new friends who lived in the mountain. Her parents were just grateful to have her back. They packed up and left the same day. I tried to interview Sarah before they left, but she wouldn't talk to me. Just stared at me with these big, dark eyes and smiled. When I asked her about her new friends, she leaned close and whispered something that made my blood freeze. They're still hungry, but they're patient. They can wait. Then she giggled, and for just a second it sounded exactly like the giggling Dave and I heard in those woods. I retired the next week. Now I live in Knoxville, as far from the park as I can get while staying in Tennessee. I work at a small college, teaching biology to freshman students. Safe, normal work with safe, normal people. But I still listen to the park radio frequencies sometimes. Old habits die hard. And sometimes, late at night when the static is heavy, I hear reports that sound familiar. Damaged campsites. Missing food. Strange tracks that don't match any known animal. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear reports of children seen where children shouldn't be. Pale, thin children with white eyes and pointed teeth. Children who giggle in the darkness and ask if you want to be their new mommy and daddy. If you ever go camping in the Smokies, remember this. If you see children in the woods at night, children who shouldn't be there, don't trust your parental instincts. Don't try to help them. Don't offer them food. Just run. The mountain keeps its children well fed, and they're always looking for their next meal. Total word count, 4,247 words. My name is Billy Thornwick, and I've been pulling folks out of these Kentucky gorges for 16 years now. Started when I was 23, fresh out of paramedic training, thinking I could save everyone. The mountains taught me different real quick. Daniel Boone National Forest is beautiful country, don't get me wrong. Red River Gorge draws climbers from all over the world with its sandstone cliffs and natural arches. But beauty and danger dance real close together out here. One wrong step on ice-covered rock, one anchor that pulls free, and paradise becomes a grave. I learned that lesson the hard way 5 years back when my wife Sarah fell during what should have been an easy hike. Equipment malfunction, they said. Rope snapped for no good reason. I was 20 feet away, close enough to hear her scream, but too far to help. That's why I do what I do now. Nobody else should go through what I did. The call came in on January 15th, 1984. Ice storm had hit the gorge 2 days prior, coating everything in a crystal shell that made the rocks pretty as glass and twice as dangerous. 4 climbers, experienced ones, not weekend warriors, had gone missing in what the locals call Deep Hollow. When they didn't check in at their planned time, their friends called us. I grabbed my gear and headed out with Janet Crawford, our best climbing instructor. Janet had been working these cliffs for 8 years, knew every route and anchor point better than her own backyard. If anyone could navigate the iced-up rocks, it was her. Weather Service says another storm's coming, Janet said as we hiked the approach trail. Ice crunched under our boots like broken glass. We need to be in and out fast. The approach to Deep Hollow is a bear even in good conditions. You follow an old Cherokee hunting trail for 3 miles, then drop down through a maze of boulders and fallen trees. The hollow at sea. Bluff sits at the bottom of a horseshoe of cliffs, walls rising 300 feet on 3 sides. Only one way in or out on foot, and that path gets real narrow, real fast. We found their base camp first. 4 tents, perfectly arranged, gear sorted and organized like they were planning to come back. No signs of panic or hurried departure. Coffee pot still had lukewarm coffee in it. "This is wrong," Janet said, checking their climbing permits. "Says here they were planning a 1-day climb on the south face. Why set up a full camp?" I studied the permit. Tom Bradley. I knew that name. His family ran a climbing guide service out of Slade. Good people, careful people. Not the type to take unnecessary risks or change plans without telling someone. We followed boot prints in the snow toward the cliff base. The prints were clear and steady. 4 sets walking in single file like they knew exactly where they were going. No signs of distress or struggle. But something felt off about the whole scene. Something I couldn't put my finger on. The air in Deep Hollow always feels different than up on the rim. Thicker somehow, like it's pressing down on you. Today, it felt worse than usual. Too quiet. Even with the ice storm, we should have heard something. Wind through the rocks, ice shifting and cracking. Something. Instead, the silence sat on us like a blanket. "You hear that?" Janet asked, stopping suddenly. Hear what? Exactly. Nothing. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. It's like everything with sense enough to leave already did. We found them at the base of the north face, arranged in a perfect line 20 feet apart. All four lying on their backs, arms at their sides, facing straight up at the cliff. Peaceful as sleeping children, except for the fact that they were clearly dead. I've seen a lot of climbing accidents, and this wasn't one. No blood, no obvious injuries, no signs of impact or trauma. But something had killed them, something that left them looking like they'd just laid down for a nap and never woke up. Janet checked for vitals while I examined their hemba. Gear. Everything was perfect. Ropes coiled properly, helmets secure, harnesses adjusted correctly. These weren't climbers who'd made fatal mistakes. These were people who'd been arranged. Billy, Janet's voice carried a tremor I'd never heard before. You need to see this. She'd rolled Tom Bradley onto his side. His climbing shirt had ridden up, revealing his back. Dark purple bruising covered his entire torso in a pattern I'd never seen. Long parallel lines like he'd been squeezed by something with massive fingers. Internal injuries, Janet whispered. Massive ones. But look at his skin. Not a cut or scrape anywhere. I knelt beside the others and found the same thing. Massive internal trauma with no external cause. Like they'd been crushed from the inside out by some impossible force. The wind picked up, whistling through the rocks in a way that made my skin crawl. For just a moment, it sounded almost like breathing. We called it in on the satellite radio, though the signal kept cutting out with bursts of static. Dispatch confirmed they'd send the medical examiner and a full recovery team, but the new storm system meant we had maybe 4 hours before the hollow became completely inaccessible. We need to document everything before the weather hits, I told Janet. She nodded but kept glancing up at the cliff faces like she expected something to be watching us back. I started photographing the scene while Janet secured the bodies for transport. Standard procedure. Nothing we hadn't done dozens of times before. But every few minutes one of us would stop and listen, convinced we'd heard something moving in the rocks above us. Billy, Janet's voice was tight. Look at this. She was crouched beside the cliff face, studying something carved into the sandstone. Deep gouges, 4 parallel lines about 6 inches apart, cut into solid rock like someone had dragged massive claws down the wall. The marks were fresh. Rock dust still clung to the grooves. Bear? I suggested, though I knew it was wrong even as I said it. The marks were too deep, too clean, and they started 40 feet up the cliff face. Bears don't climb vertical rock, Janet said, and their claws don't cut stone like butter. We found more marks as we worked, dozens of them scattered across different sections of cliff, some old enough to be weathered smooth, others so fresh they still had rock chips at the bottom. Whatever was making these marks had been using deep hollow for a long time. The temperature started dropping as the next storm system moved in. Ice began forming on our gear, making everything slippery and dangerous. We worked faster, wanting to get the bodies ready for the recovery team before conditions got worse. That's when Janet found the cave. This wasn't here last summer, she said, standing in front of a dark opening in the cliff face about 30 feet from where we'd found the bodies. I've climbed this wall a dozen times. There was no cave here. The opening was maybe 8 feet wide and perfectly round, like someone had used a giant drill bit on the rock. The edges were smooth and fresh with no signs of natural weathering. Whatever had made this hole had done it recently. Could be a sinkhole, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Limestone caves sometimes collapse and create new openings. This isn't limestone, Janet reminded me. It's sandstone, and sinkholes don't make perfect circles. A sound echoed from inside the cave, deep and hollow like wind through a massive tunnel, but there was something else underneath it, something that made the hair on my arms stand up. It sounded almost like breathing. Janet played her flashlight beam into the opening. The cave seemed to go back farther than the light could reach, disappearing, into solid rock that should have ended after 20 feet. The walls were perfectly smooth, like they'd been carved by something that knew exactly what it was doing. We should check it out, Janet said, adjusting her headlamp. No, The word came out sharper than I'd intended. Recovery team will handle cave exploration. Our job is the bodies. Janet gave me a look but didn't argue. We both felt it, something about that cave that made every survival instinct we had start screaming warnings. We finished photographing the scene and started preparing the bodies for transport. Standard procedure called for individual body bags and careful documentation of their positions. But as we worked, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The arrangement wasn't random. The 4 bodies formed a perfect line pointing directly at the new cave, like arrows showing the way. "Janet," I said quietly, "tell me you see it too." She followed my gaze and went pale. "They're pointing right at it." Like they were walking toward the cave when whatever happened to them happened. A new sound echoed from the cave opening, deeper this time, with a rhythmic quality that definitely wasn't wind. It sounded like something massive taking slow, deliberate breaths. The storm hit us hard then, ice pellets stinging our faces and making the already treacherous footing even worse. We secured what we could and took shelter under an overhang to wait for the recovery team. But the sounds from the cave continued, and as the storm grew louder, I swear I could hear something else mixing with the wind, something that sounded almost like voices calling from deep underground. "Billy," Janet whispered, her breath visible in the frigid air. "What if they weren't climbing when they died? What if they were running?" I looked back at the bodies, now partially covered by blowing snow. 4 experienced climbers, all found at the base of a cliff they could have climbed blindfolded, all arranged in a perfect line pointing toward a cave that hadn't existed 6 months ago. The pieces started falling into place, and I didn't like the picture they were making. Tom Bradley's family had been guiding climbers in these mountains for 3 generations. He would have known every formation, every route, every danger in Deep Hollow. If he'd brought a team here, it was because he thought it was safe. So what had changed? The recovery team arrived just as the storm started to ease. 3 paramedics, 2 climbing specialists, and Dr. Sarah Mitchell from the medical examiner's office. Sarah was good people, had worked with us on dozens of cases over the years, but even she looked shaken after examining the bodies. "I've never seen internal injuries like this," she told me as her team loaded the body bags onto stretchers. "Every major organ shows signs of massive compression trauma, but there's no corresponding external damage. It's like they were crushed by something that could reach inside them." "Equipment malfunction?" I suggested. "Maybe their harnesses failed under extreme load." Sarah shook her head. "Their harnesses are perfect, not even worn, and this kind of damage would require forces that would have pulverized their bones too, but their skeletons are intact." One of the climbing specialists, a guy named Rick who'd worked with us before, was studying the claw marks in the cliff face. "These are new," he called out, "and they go up at least 60 feet. Whatever made them was either flying or climbing straight up vertical rock." "Could be ice damage," I said, but I knew it sounded weak. "Ice doesn't make claw marks, Billy, and it sure doesn't carve perfect circles in solid stone." The new cave was drawing attention from everyone. Dr. Mitchell took photos while Rick did some basic measurements. The opening was exactly 8 feet in diameter and appeared to extend back into the cliff much farther than should have been possible. "This formation isn't on any of our geological surveys," Rick said. "According to the mapping, this whole section should be solid rock for at least 100 feet. "Caves can form quickly sometimes," Janet offered. "Water erosion, freeze-thaw cycles. Not in sandstone, and not this fast. This would take thousands of years of water flow, minimum." As the team worked, I kept catching glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision. Nothing clear, just shadows shifting between the rocks when they should have been still. Every time I turned to look directly, nothing was there. Janet was having the same problem. She'd snap her head toward a section of cliff, study it for a few seconds, then shake her head and go back to work. Whatever we were seeing, or thinking we saw, it was making both of us jumpy. The real problem started when we tried to leave. Rick went up first, setting anchors for the rest of us to follow. The plan was simple: technical rope rescue in reverse, hauling the stretchers up the same route we'd used to descend into the hollow. We'd done it hundreds of times. Rick made it about 40 feet up before his radio crackled to life. "Something's wrong with the rock up here." His voice was tight with concentration. "The anchor placements I used on the way down aren't holding." I looked up to see him clinging to the cliff face, trying to reset an anchor that should have been bomber solid. The metal piton he'd driven into a crack was slowly working its way out, like the rock was pushing it free. "The cracks are closing." Rick's voice carried a note of panic. "The rock is actually moving." That's when we heard it clearly for the first time. A deep rumble from somewhere inside the cliff, like massive machinery starting up. The ground under our feet vibrated with each pulse. "Everyone back from the cliff face," I ordered, though I had no idea what good it would do. The hollow was surrounded on 3 sides by vertical walls. If the cliffs weren't stable, we were trapped. Rick tried a different route, working his way toward a section that looked more solid. But the same thing happened. Anchor points that should have been permanent started failing as soon as he weighted them. The rock itself was betraying every principle of climbing physics I'd learned in 16 years. "The cave," Janet said quietly. "It's getting bigger." She was right. The perfectly round opening had grown to maybe 10 feet across while we'd been focused on Rick's climbing problems. Not erosion, not weathering. It was expanding like something was pushing outward from inside. Dr. Mitchell was backing away from the opening, her face pale. "There's air movement," she said, "like something breathing, something big." The sounds from inside the cave were getting louder and more rhythmic. Definitely breathing now, slow and deep like a sleeping giant. But giants don't carve caves or make claw marks in solid rock. Rick's voice came over the radio, tight with fear. "I'm coming down. The whole cliff face is unstable. Rocks are shifting every time I place protection." As he rappelled back down to us, pieces of the puzzle started clicking together in ways that made my mouth go dry. The perfectly arranged bodies pointing toward the cave. The fresh claw marks going straight up impossible rock faces. The cave that appeared overnight and kept growing. "Janet," I said quietly, "what if the hollow itself is the problem?" "What do you mean?" "What if it's not just a geographic feature? What if it's alive?" She stared at me like I'd lost my mind, and maybe I had. But everything we'd seen suggested something impossible, that Deep Hollow wasn't just a place where something lived. It was something that lived. That's when the breathing stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the sounds had been. Without the rhythmic background noise, every small sound we made seemed amplified. Our footsteps on gravel, our equipment clinking together, our own breathing harsh in the cold air. Rick touched down beside us, coiling his rope with shaking hands. "We can't climb out," he said. "The rock won't hold anchors. It's like the whole cliff face is soft somehow." "Helicopters?" Janet suggested. I shook my head. "Not in this weather, and the wind patterns in the hollow make it too dangerous anyway." We were trapped at the bottom of a 300-foot pit with something that might not be entirely geological. And whatever it was, it had just stopped breathing. The cave opening was definitely bigger now, maybe 12 feet across and growing steadily. The smooth walls caught our flashlight beams and reflected them back like polished metal. No natural cave formation I'd ever seen had walls that perfect. "We need to get everyone together," I said. "Away from the cave, away from the cliff faces, center of the hollow." As we gathered our gear and moved toward what felt like the safest spot available, I caught sight of something that made my blood freeze. Scattered around the base of the cliffs, partially hidden by snow and debris, were more bones than 4 climbers should have. A lot more bones. "Rick," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Bring your light over here." He joined me near a pile of what I'd first taken for fallen rocks. But rocks don't have joint articulations or teeth marks. Under the snow and debris were the scattered remains of at least a dozen people. Old bones, some so weathered they might have been there for years. "Jesus Christ," Rick whispered. "How many people have gone missing in this hollow?" Dr. Mitchell was already examining the remains with professional detachment, but I could see the fear in her eyes. "Different ages," she said. Some of these bones are decades old. Others are much more recent. Janet found climbing gear scattered among the bones. Old pitons and carabiners dating back to the 70s. Newer equipment that couldn't be more than a few years old. All of it showed the same stress patterns we'd seen on today's victims. Metal bent and twisted by impossible forces. "It's a feeding ground," Janet said quietly. "Whatever lives here has been collecting climbers for decades." The cave opening was 15 feet across now and still growing. The smooth walls caught and amplified every sound, creating echoes that seemed to come from miles underground. But worse than the echoes were the new sounds starting to emerge from the depths, something massive moving through stone, getting closer. "We need to get out of here," Rick said. "Now." "How?" I asked. "You said yourself the cliff won't take anchors." "Then we find another way." But there wasn't another way. Deep Hollow was a natural trap, designed by geology to funnel everything toward the center, toward the cave that wasn't supposed to exist. The breathing started again, but different this time. Faster, more excited. Like whatever was down there had caught our scent and was waking up hungry. That's when the ground started to move. Not an earthquake. This was targeted and deliberate. The floor of the hollow bulged upward in a line running from the cave toward where we stood. Something enormous was moving just beneath the surface, following the scent of fresh prey. "Spread out," I yelled. "Don't let it track us as a group." We scattered toward different sections of the hollow, but there wasn't far to go. The walls were closing in. Literally. The three cliff faces that surrounded us were slowly moving together like the jaws of some impossible trap. Dr. Mitchell screamed. I spun around to see her sinking into what had been solid ground just seconds before. The earth was swallowing her like quicksand, pulling her down towards something that waited underneath. Rick lunged forward and grabbed her arms, trying to pull her free. But whatever had her was stronger. Much stronger. "Help me!" he yelled. Janet and I grabbed Dr. Mitchell's gear and started hauling, fighting against a force that felt like a hydraulic winch. For a moment it seemed like we might win. She came up a few inches, gasping and covered in dirt. Then something roared from directly beneath us. The sound came up through solid rock like it was nothing but loose gravel. A bellow of rage and hunger that seemed to shake the entire gorge. Dr. Mitchell was yanked downward with such violence that Rick lost his grip and fell backward. She disappeared into the earth like it was water, her screams cut off with horrible finality. The ground sealed itself over her with barely a ripple. "What the hell was that thing?" Rick was backing away from the spot where Dr. Mitchell had vanished, his face white with shock. I was remembering stories my grandfather used to tell, Cherokee legends about things that lived in the deep places of the mountains. Creatures older than human memory, hungry things that slept beneath the stone and woke only when prey wandered too close to their lairs. The cave mouth was 20 feet across now, and I could see movement in the depths. Something pale and massive shifting in the darkness. The breathing was getting louder, more excited. It's not just hiding in the cave, I realized. It is the cave, the whole hollow. Janet understood first. The walls, the ground, all of it. We're standing inside something alive. The cliff faces were definitely moving now, grinding slowly inward like the walls of a giant mouth. In maybe 10 minutes, Deep Hollow would become a death trap with no escape routes. But I had one last desperate idea. In my rescue pack were 4 emergency thermite charges, military surplus gear designed to cut through metal or melt ice blockages in caves. They burned hot enough to melt steel, hot enough to cause serious geological damage if used right. Janet, Rick, get to the south wall, as high up as you can climb. Use anything for protection, doesn't matter if it holds long term. "What are you doing?" Janet asked. "Something stupid," I admitted. "But it might give you a chance." I pulled out all 4 thermite charges and ran toward the cave opening. The thing inside was definitely waking up. I could see his actions of what might have been a massive head shifting in the darkness, sense intelligence focusing on the movement and heat of living prey. 25 feet across now. The cave was opening like a hungry mouth. I set the charges in a line across what I hoped was the creature's throat and activated the timers. 30 seconds. Enough time to get clear if I ran, not enough time to think about what a bad idea this probably was. The thermite ignited just as something erupted from the depths of the cave, something that belonged in nightmares, not in the mountains of Kentucky. 200 feet of pale, segmented flesh that moved through solid rock like a fish through water. The front end was mostly mouth, lined with rows of teeth designed for crushing rather than cutting. The thermite charges burned at 4,000 degrees, turning stone to lava and lava to gas. The creature's scream shook rocks loose from cliffs 3 miles away and probably woke every animal in the forest. But it worked. The thing recoiled back into its lair, thrashing in pain and rage. The cliff walls stopped moving inward, the ground stopped shifting underfoot. For maybe 60 seconds we had a chance. "Now!" I yelled to Janet and Rick. "Climb like your lives depend on it." Because they did. Janet made it out. Rick made it out. I made it halfway. The creature came after me as I was rappelling up the south face, using the chaos of the thermite explosion to mask my escape route. But whatever I'd done to it was only a temporary setback. By the time I was 100 feet up, I could feel the cliff face starting to shift again. The rock I was climbing began to soften and bend like clay. My anchors pulled free one by one as the creature tried to shake me loose like an annoying insect. I made it to within 50 feet of the rim before I ran out of solid stone to climb. That's when Janet made the choice that ill haunts my dreams. She could have run, should have run. The Forest Service would have sealed off Deep Hollow, declared it geologically unstable, and nobody else would have died. But she was a climber, and climbers don't leave people behind. Janet rappelled back down to me with a fresh rope and enough anchors to get us both out. Simple rope rescue, something we'd practiced 1,000 times. But the creature was learning. As Janet rigged the haul system, the cliff face began to buckle outward. Not gradually this time, with the violent suddenness of an explosion. The entire wall of stone peeled away from the mountain like old paint, taking Janet with it. I watched her fall 300 feet into the maw of something that shouldn't exist. Something that had been feeding in these mountains for longer than humans have been telling stories around campfires. The rock slide she'd triggered by pulling those final anchors saved my life and buried Deep Hollow under 50,000 tons of broken sandstone. The creature's screams stopped abruptly, cut off by the weight of half a mountain. But I know it's not dead. Can't be. Things that perfectly adapted to their environment don't die easily. I transferred out of the Red River Gorge district 3 months later. Told my supervisor it was because of Janet's death, which was true enough. What I didn't tell him was that I couldn't climb anymore. Every time I touched rock, I could feel it watching me. The Forest Service classified Deep Hollow as geologically unstable due to recent seismic activity and closed it permanently to climbing. The official report blamed the deaths on equipment failure during an unexpected rock slide. Clean, simple, believable. But I still monitor the seismic stations in that part of the forest. And lately the readings have been showing micro-tremors originating from areas that should be solid bedrock. Small ones, barely registering on the equipment. Like something massive turning over in its sleep. Janet was right about one thing. Some places in these mountains are hungry, the Chirocks. I knew it. The moonshiners knew it. And now I know it too. There are hollows in these hills that aren't just geological features. They're traps, patient as stone and twice as deadly. If you're ever climbing in Kentucky and find yourself in a gorge that feels too quiet, too empty, too perfect, get out. Don't investigate the strange caves or try to explain the impossible claw marks. Don't camp overnight and sure as hell don't go exploring after dark. Just climb back up to daylight as fast as you can and never ever go back. Because some things are better left sleeping in the deep places of the world, and some hollows are better left empty, even if they're not really empty at all. My name is Theodore Ashbrook, but everyone calls me Theo. I've walked every trail in these West Virginia mountains for 21 years. Dolly Sod's Wilderness has been my home away from home since 1958, back when I was fresh out of college with my geology degree and big dreams about understanding every rock formation in Monongahela National Forest. I'm the senior trail maintenance supervisor here, which means I know every boulder, every creek crossing, every dangerous drop-off that could kill you if you're not careful. I've built over 40 miles of trail with my own hands, using nothing but hand tools, dynamite, and stubborn determination. When hikers get lost up here, I'm usually the one they call to bring them home. The thing about Dolly Sods is that it's not like anywhere else on Earth. We're sitting up on a high plateau, over 4,000 feet above sea level, where the wind never stops blowing. The rocks here are ancient sandstone carved into weird shapes by millions of years of weather. Some folks say they look like faces. Some say they look like sleeping giants. I always just saw rocks. That was before November of 1979, before everything changed. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 3 hikers had gone missing somewhere near the Big Boulder Field on the eastern edge of the wilderness. College kids from Virginia Tech, experienced enough to know better than to wander off the marked trails. Their car was still parked at the trailhead, covered in 2 days' worth of snow. "We need a search team up there," said Susan McKinley, our search and rescue coordinator. Susan had been doing this work for 12 years, and she'd never lost anyone permanently. "Weather's coming in again tonight. If they're hurt and exposed, we've got maybe 6 hours." I grabbed my pack, loaded with everything I might need for a multi-day search. Pulaski axe for cutting through deadfall, Irst aid kit, emergency blankets, flares, and enough food for 3 days. My geological tools came too: rock hammer, hand lens, and compass. You never know when knowing the lay of the land might save someone's life. The trail up to the boulder field is steep and rocky, winding through stunted red spruce trees that grow crooked from fighting the constant wind. The higher you go, the more the forest gives way to open heath, covered in cranberry bushes and scattered with massive chunks of sandstone that fell from the cliffs above thousands of years ago. I'd been up this trail hundreds of times, but something felt different that morning. The wind was making strange sounds as it moved through the rock formations, almost like music, like someone was humming a tune just too quiet to make out. I stopped several times to listen, but every time I did, the sound faded away. When I reached the boulder field, I found the first search team's equipment scattered around one of the larger rock formations. Backpacks, sleeping bags, even their boots, all arranged in a perfect circle around a 20-foot-tall pillar of sandstone. But no sign of the team members themselves: Bill Henderson, Mike Foster, and Sarah Du Bois. 3 of the most experienced search and rescue volunteers in the state. They knew these mountains as well as I did. There was no way they would have just abandoned their gear and wandered off. I called out their names, but the only answer was that strange humming in the wind. My compass was acting funny too, spinning slowly instead of pointing north. It kept settling on that tall rock pillar, like the needle was being pulled by something stronger than the Earth's magnetic field. That's when I noticed the snow patterns. Fresh powder had fallen the night before, and it should have been scattered everywhere by the wind. Instead, it formed perfect geometric shapes around each boulder, triangles, circles, spirals that looked almost like writing in some language I didn't recognize. I'd seen a lot of strange things in 21 years of mountain work, but I'd never seen snow arrange itself into patterns. Snow doesn't do that on its own. That's when I knew something was very wrong in my mountains. I spent the next 3 hours searching the area around the boulder field, looking for any sign of the missing teams. The terrain up here is tricky, lots of crevices and hidden drop-offs where someone could fall and get trapped. But I found nothing. No footprints in the snow beyond the equipment circle, no disturbed vegetation, no blood or torn clothing caught on the sharp rock edges. It was like 9 people had just vanished into thin air. The wind kept making that humming sound, and I was starting to think it wasn't the wind at all. The sound was too regular, too much like a melody. Sometimes it seemed to be coming from inside the rocks themselves, like the stone was vibrating at just the right frequency to make music. I radioed back to Susan. "I found their gear, but no sign of the teams. Something's not right up here." "What do you mean?" Her voice was scratchy through the radio static. "The equipment's arranged in circles, perfect circles, and my compass won't point north. It keeps pointing at the rocks." Probably just mineral deposits affecting the magnetic field, she said. You know how iron ore can mess with instruments. She was right, of course. I'd seen that happen before in areas with high metal content. But this felt different somehow. The pull wasn't constant. It came in waves, like the rocks were breathing. I decided to investigate the central pillar more closely. It was massive, maybe 30 feet around at the base, rising up like a natural monument. The sandstone was weathered smooth in some places, but covered in deep grooves in others. As I got closer, I realized the grooves weren't random erosion patterns. They formed intricate spirals and interconnected lines that covered the entire surface of the stone. I had never seen natural rock formations that looked like that. I pulled out my hand lens and examined the surface more carefully. The grooves were definitely carved, not weathered. But they were old, very old. The edges were rounded by centuries of rain and wind. Someone had spent years creating this pattern, maybe generations of people working on the same stone. That's when I heard my name. Theo. Quiet at first, almost lost in the wind sound. Then again, clearer. Theodore. I spun around looking for whoever was calling me. The boulder field stretched out in all directions. Hundreds of stone pillars and fallen blocks creating a maze of shadows and hiding places. But I couldn't see anyone. Hello? Who's there? The voice came again, but not from any direction I could point to. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, like the rocks themselves were speaking. Theodore Ashbrook, 21 years, geology degree, widower. My blood went cold. Nobody up here knew those details about me except there was nobody up here to know them. The voice knew things about my life that I'd never told anyone in the mountains. Things about my wife who died 3 years ago. Things about why I spent so much time alone up in the wilderness. I backed away from the central pillar, but the voice followed me. Come closer, Theodore. We've been waiting for you. That's when I saw them. Sarah Du Bois was standing about 50 feet away, next to another large boulder. She looked perfectly normal, wearing her orange search and rescue jacket, her blonde hair tied back in its usual ponytail. She was waving at me to come over. Sarah, I called out, relief flooding through me. Where are the others? We've been looking for you. She smiled and pointed at the boulder behind her. They're right here, Theo. We're all right here. Come see. I started toward her, but something made me stop. Sarah looked normal, but she wasn't moving right. She stood perfectly still, not shifting her weight or moving her head like a living person would, and her smile never changed, like it was, painted on her face. Sarah, are you okay? You look hurt. I'm fine, she said, still pointing at the boulder. We're all fine. Better than fine. Come see. I took another step closer and realized I could see through her. She was there, solid-looking, but I could make out the outline of the rocks behind her through her body, like she was made of thick glass. Then she walked backward into the boulder and disappeared. I ran to where she'd been standing but found only solid rock. The stone was warm under my palm, warmer than it should have been in the cold mountain air, and I could swear I felt something moving inside it, like a slow heartbeat. The humming sound got louder, and now I could hear other voices mixed in with it. Bill Henderson's deep baritone, Mike Foster's raspy smoker's cough, the missing college students calling for help from somewhere I couldn't reach. They were all inside the rocks. I should have run. Every instinct I'd developed in 21 years of mountain survival was screaming at me to get out of that boulder field as fast as my legs could carry me. But I couldn't leave 9 people trapped in there, even if I didn't understand how they'd gotten trapped in solid stone. I radioed Susan again. I need you to bring a geological survey team up here and some heavy equipment, maybe drilling gear. Drilling gear? Theo, what's going on up there? I found them. They're in the rocks, Susan. I know how that sounds, but I saw Sarah Du Bois walk into a boulder. She's trapped inside somehow. Long silence on the radio. Then, are you feeling okay? Maybe the altitude's getting to you. I'm fine, but I need help. Can you get Dr. Rivers up here? If anyone can figure out what's happening with these rock formations, it's him. Dr. Paul Rivers was a geology professor from West Virginia University who consulted with the Forest Service on unusual minor malformations. He was a skeptic like me, the kind of man who believed in science and hard evidence. If I could get him to see what I was seeing, maybe we could figure out how to help the people trapped inside. While I waited for reinforcements, I examined more of the boulders. The carved spiral patterns weren't just on the central pillar. They covered every large stone in the field, and the patterns seemed to connect, flowing from one boulder to the next like a massive circuit board made of rock. The humming was getting stronger too. Sometimes I could almost make out words in it, like a dozen people singing the same song in a language I didn't recognize. The snow around my feet was starting to melt, even though the air temperature was still below freezing. The rocks were generating heat somehow. Dr. Rivers arrived just before sunset, along with Susan and a fresh search team. He was a thin, bearded man in his 50s who moved with the careful precision of someone who spent his life studying dangerous terrain. "Show me what you found," he said, setting down his equipment case. I led him to the boulder where I'd seen Sarah disappear. The surface was now noticeably warm to the touch, and the carved patterns seemed to glow faintly in the gathering darkness. "Remarkable," Rivers said, running his hands over the spiral grooves. "These carvings are definitely pre-Columbian, possibly much older. The style doesn't match any known Native American petroglyphs in this region." "That's not the important part," I said. "Watch this." I called out Sarah's name, and within a few seconds, her ghostly form appeared again next to the boulder. Dr. Rivers stumbled backward, nearly falling over his equipment case. That's impossible," he whispered. Sarah smiled her painted-on smile and beckoned for us to come closer. "Paul Rivers," she said in that too calm voice. "Geology professors. Sore, divorced. 2 children who don't call anymore." Rivers went pale. How could she know that? "Come join us," Sarah continued. "We understand everything now. The stones sing to us, and we sing back. It's beautiful here." The humming got louder, and I could see Dr. Rivers starting to lean toward the boulder despite himself. His eyes had gone glassy, and he was taking slow, hypnotized steps forward. "Paul, don't!" I grabbed his arm and pulled him back. "Fight it!" But it was too late. The singing had gotten hold of him somehow. He shook off my grip with surprising strength and walked steadily toward the boulder where Sarah waited. She reached out her translucent hand, and he took it. "It doesn't hurt," he said, looking back at me with a dreamy expression. "It's warm, and the music is so beautiful." Then they both stepped backward into the solid rock and vanished. I pressed my hands against the stone where they'd disappeared. The surface was hot now, almost too hot to touch, and I could feel vibrations inside, like something huge was moving around in there. "Theo!" Susan's voice came from somewhere behind me. "Where did Dr. Rivers go?" I turned around to find her standing in the center of the equipment circle, looking confused. She'd been right beside me a moment ago, but now she was 50 feet away. "Stay where you are," I shouted. "Don't move toward any of the rocks." But she was already walking toward the central pillar, that same glassy look in her eyes that I'd seen on Dr. Rivers' face. The humming was so loud now it seemed to be coming from inside my own skull. "Susan, fight it. Don't listen to the singing." She paused for just a moment, shaking her head like she was trying to wake up from a dream. "Theo, what's happening to me? I can't stop walking. Grab onto something, anything." She lunged toward a smaller boulder and wrapped her arms around it, but her feet kept sliding forward in the snow, drawn by some invisible force toward the central pillar. The carved patterns on all the stones were glowing brighter now, pulsing in rhythm with the humming sound. "I can't hold on," she gasped. "It's too strong." Her fingers slipped from the rock and she stumbled forward into the towering stone pillar. For just a second, I saw her face through the translucent surface of the stone, her mouth open in a scream I couldn't hear. Then she was gone. I was alone in a field of singing rocks with 11 people trapped inside them, and I could feel the pull starting to work on me too, a gentle tugging sensation that wanted me to walk forward and join the others in their warm, musical prison. The stones weren't just trapping people, they were calling them, and they were calling me by name. The humming changed as soon as Susan disappeared into the stone. It became deeper, more complex, like an entire choir instead of just a few voices. I could hear her in there now, along with all the others, their voices blending together in harmonies that made my bones ache. And I was starting to understand what they were singing about. The rocks weren't individual stones at all. They were parts of something bigger, a single enormous entity that had been sleeping in the earth for thousands of years. The carved patterns were like nerve pathways connecting each boulder to the greater consciousness. And the people it had absorbed weren't dead. They were being preserved, kept alive as part of its collective mind. It was feeding on them somehow, drawing energy from their life force while keeping their bodies suspended in some kind of crystalline matrix inside the stone. They would live forever, singing its ancient songs, sharing its memories of the deep places beneath the mountain. Theodore. The voice was clearer now, speaking inside my head instead of through the wind. You understand now. You've always understood. That's why we chose you. Images flashed through my mind that weren't my own memories. The boulder field, thousands of years ago, when the stones first emerged from the earth during some long-forgotten earthquake. Native American shamans discovering the singing rocks and learning to communicate with them. German settlers in the 1800s, some drawn into the stones, while others fled in terror, creating the folklore that still survived in old-timers' stories. Your wife called to us before she died, the voice continued. Cancer is such a slow, painful way to fade away. We could have preserved her perfectly, kept her safe and singing forever. That hit me like a punch to the gut. My wife Marie had fought her illness for 2 years before losing the battle. I'd held her hand as she slipped away in that sterile hospital room, wishing desperately that I could save her somehow. We can reunite you, the entity promised. She's waiting for you in the deep places. All you have to do is step forward. And God help me, I wanted to. The pull was getting stronger, and part of me was tired of fighting it. I'd been alone for 3 years, spending more and more time in the wilderness because I couldn't bear to be around other people's happiness. What was I going back to? An empty house and a job that was just an excuse to avoid human contact. I took a step toward the central pillar. The carved patterns flared brighter, and I could see shapes moving inside the stone. Faces, hands, entire human figures suspended in crystalline amber. They looked peaceful, their eyes closed, small smiles on their lips as they sang their eternal songs. I took another step. That's right, the voice encouraged. Join us, Theodore. Become part of something greater than yourself. You've spent your whole life studying rocks and minerals, now become one with the living stone itself. My hand reached out toward the glowing surface of the pillar. I could feel the warmth radiating from it, calling to me like a fireplace on a cold night. But then I heard something else. A tiny sound, barely audible beneath the chorus of absorbed voices. Someone crying, someone afraid. One of the college students, the youngest one. Yes, he was trapped in there with all the others, but she wasn't singing along peacefully. She was terrified, trying to scream but unable to make more than a whisper through the crystalline matrix. They weren't at peace. They were prisoners, conscious and aware, but unable to move or speak or die. The entity was keeping them alive against their will, feeding on their fear and desperation while showing me false visions of contentment. Marie wasn't waiting for me in there. Marie was dead and at rest, not trapped forever in a living nightmare of stone and song. I yanked my hand back from the pillar and stumbled away, fighting against the invisible pull with every step. The humming turned angry, discordant, like a massive pipe organ playing all the wrong notes at once. You cannot resist forever, the voice hissed in my mind. We are patient. We have waited 10,000 years. We can wait longer. But I had one advantage the entity didn't expect. I'd brought explosives. Trail maintenance in rocky terrain requires controlled blasting to clear obstacles and create safe passage. I always carried a few sticks of dynamite and blasting caps in my pack, along with the proper permits and safety equipment. I'd used them hundreds of times to remove dangerous overhangs and split boulders that blocked trail access. I'd never used them to fight a crystalline alien intelligence before, but there's a first time for everything. The patterns on the stones pulsed frantically as I pulled out the explosives and started setting charges around the base of the central pillar. The entity could read my intentions somehow, and it didn't like what it saw. "You will kill them all," it warned. "Every person we have preserved will be crushed when the matrix collapses. Their blood will be on your hands." It was probably right. But leaving them trapped forever in conscious paralysis wasn't mercy. It was tort. At least this way, they'd have a chance at peace. I lit the fuses and ran. The explosion shattered the mountain silence like the world ending. The central pillar cracked down the middle, with a sound like thunder, and for just an instant I saw them all spilling out. Sarah, Dr. Rivers, Susan, the missing hikers, the college students. They looked solid and real for maybe 2 seconds before the collapsing stone crushed them back into darkness. Susan tried to say something to me in that brief moment of freedom, but I couldn't hear her words over the sound of falling rock. I like to think she was saying, "Thank you." The other boulders in the field cracked and split as the central pillar came down, like a network losing its main server. The humming stopped abruptly, replaced by an awful grinding sound as tons of ancient sandstone crashed to the ground in a cloud of dust and flying fragments. When the dust settled, the boulder field looked like a war zone. Broken rock scattered everywhere, the carved patterns shattered beyond recognition. The strange geometric snow patterns melted away instantly, leaving just ordinary white powder blown around by ordinary wind. I found 12 bodies in the wreckage, all dead, but they looked peaceful. No signs of the terror I'd seen in the trapped girl's face. Whatever had been done to them was undone now. The official report blamed the deaths on a geological instability that caused the rock formation to collapse. The area was declared unsafe and closed to public access indefinitely. I backed up that story, even though it meant taking responsibility for accidentally triggering the collapse while investigating the missing persons. Better that than trying to explain singing stones and people walking into solid rock. Nobody would have believed it anyway. I took early retirement 6 months later. Couldn't stand being in the mountains anymore, not after what I'd seen. Every rock formation looked suspicious. Every wind sound made me think I was hearing voices calling my name. The tinnitus started about a week after the explosion, a constant ringing in my ears that sounds almost like humming if I listen too closely. The doctors say it's probably hearing damage from the blast, but I know better. Part of that thing got into my head before I destroyed it, and it's still in there, singing its patient songs. Sometimes I drive past the closed road that leads up to Dolly Sods, and I can see new growth in the restricted area. Young trees, fresh grass, like the land is healing itself. But I also see new rock formations emerging from the ground, weathered smooth and carved with spiral patterns that look almost familiar. I've started getting reports from other forest services too. Yellowstone has some unusual granite formations that make music in the wind. Yosemite rangers are finding equipment arranged in perfect circles. A geology professor in Colorado disappeared while investigating some singing cliffs, and they never found his body. It's spreading. Or maybe it was always out there and I just opened my eyes to see it. If you're ever hiking in the wilderness and you hear rocks singing your name, don't stop to listen. Don't try to figure out where the music is coming from. Cover your ears and run in the opposite direction as fast as you can. Because the stones are patient, and they're always hungry for new voices to add to their eternal choir. And once you've heard them sing, they never really stop calling to you. I know. I can still hear them now. My name is Samuel Ironwood, but everyone calls me Sam. I've been a forest ranger for 13 years now, working in the George Washington National Forest in Virginia. I know these mountains like the back of my hand. Every trail, every creek, every hidden valley where the old Cherokee used to gather their medicine plants. I got my PhD in botany before I became a ranger. My grandmother was Cherokee, and she taught me about plants when I was little. She used to tell me stories about plants that could think and feel, plants that remembered things. I always figured those were just old tales to keep kids from eating poisonous berries. The spring of 1976 started like any other. The bloodroot flowers were coming up early that year, those white petals that looked like drops of milk scattered across the forest floor. Bloodroot got its name from the red sap in its roots. Cherokee people used it for medicine, but they always warned about using too much. Some plants remember blood, my grandmother used to say. I never knew what she meant. My job was to study the plants in our forest and make sure they stayed healthy. I carried a plant press, a pH meter to test soil, and collection bags. Most days I'd hike alone through valleys that hadn't seen people in months. I liked it that way. The forest was quiet, peaceful, nothing but bird songs and wind in the leaves. The valley I'm telling you about doesn't have a name on any map. It's about 25 miles from the nearest road, hidden deep in the mountains. You can only get there by following deer trails that twist and turn through thick trees. Most people would never find it, but I knew it well. Every spring I'd hike down to check on the wildflowers. The valley floor was covered in bloodroot, wild ginger, and trillium. The soil was rich and black from an underground spring that kept everything green. It was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen. That's where I found them. Dr. Elizabeth Harper and her research team from Virginia Tech had been missing for 3 days. Their car was found at the trailhead, but no one knew where they'd gone. The Park Service called me because I knew the back country better than anyone. I found their camp on the 3rd day of searching. Their tents were still up. Food was laid out like they'd just stepped away for a minute. But something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, just silence. Then I saw them in the meadow. 4 people lying in a perfect circle around a huge patch of bloodroot flowers. Dr. Harper, 2 graduate students, and a young professor I'd met once at a conference. They looked peaceful, like they were sleeping, but their skin was white as paper. I checked for pulses, but I already knew. They were dead. All of them. And there wasn't a mark on any of them. No cuts, no bruises, nothing. Just 4 people drained of every drop of blood, lying in a circle like they'd planned it that way. The strange thing was the flowers. The bloodroot patch they were lying around was massive, bigger than any I'd ever seen. And the flowers weren't white like they should be. They were pink, almost red, like they'd been dyed with blood. I called it in on my radio, but the signal was weak this deep in the valley. I'd have to hike out to get help. But first, I took some pictures and collected a few plant samples. Something about those red-tinted flowers bothered me. In 13 years of studying plants, I'd never seen bloodroot change color like that. As I packed up my gear, I could swear the flowers were watching me, which was crazy, of course. Flowers don't have eyes, but every time I looked at them, I felt like something was looking back. The hike out of that valley was the longest of my life. Every shadow seemed to move. Every roostos, till in the bushes, made me jump. And behind me, I could smell something sweet and metallic, like the scent of blood mixed with flower perfume. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination. 4 people had died in a horrible way, and my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I was starting to remember my grandmother's stories about plants that remembered blood, and I was starting to think maybe those stories weren't just tales after all. The Park Service brought in a whole team the next day. Police, medical examiners, FBI agents, more people than that quiet valley had seen in 100 years. They set up a crime scene and started asking questions I couldn't answer. How did 4 healthy adults die with no signs of violence? Where did all their blood go? Why were they arranged in such a perfect circle? Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the forest pathologist, was the only one who seemed interested in the plants. Rebecca had worked with me for 5 years, and she knew as much about forest diseases as anyone. She was smart, careful, and never jumped to conclusions. "Sam, look at this," she said, kneeling next to the bloodroot patch. "These flowers shouldn't be this color. And look at the size of this colony. It's 3 times bigger than it should be." I knelt beside her and pulled out my pH meter. The soil around the flowers tested at 4.2, way too acidic for most plants to grow. But these bloodroot flowers were thriving. "There's something else," Rebecca said quietly so the FBI agents couldn't hear. "I took sap samples from these plants this morning. Sam, there's hemoglobin in it." "That's impossible." "That's what I thought. But I ran the test 3 times. These plants have human blood in their sap. Kevin Blackfeather, our Cherokee research assistant, had been quiet all morning. But when he heard Rebecca's words, his face went pale. "Kevin?" I asked. "You okay?" He stared at the bloodroot patch for a long moment. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. My great-grandfather told stories about this valley. He said Cherokee people used to come here for medicine plants, but they stopped. Something about the plants getting a taste for human blood. "Kevin, that's just... Is it?" He pointed at the flowers. "Look at them, Sam. Really look." I looked, and for just a second I could swear the flowers turned toward us, like they were watching. The medical examiner couldn't find a cause of death. No poison in the blood samples, no signs of disease, no wounds. The victims had simply died, as if something had sucked the life right out of them. But the strangest thing was their positioning. Not just the circle. That could have been coincidence. It was their hands. All 4 people had their hands pressed against the ground, fingers spread wide like they were trying to push themselves away from something, or like something was pulling them down. That night, Rebecca, Kevin, and I stayed in the valley to collect more samples. The FBI had left, saying they'd continue the investigation back in town. But I knew they were stumped. You can't arrest a flower for murder. We set up camp about 100 yards from the bloodroot patch. As the sun went down, the air got thick and humid. The sweet metallic smell I'd noticed before got stronger. "Sam," Rebecca whispered around midnight. "Wake up." I crawled out of my tent. Rebecca was standing at the edge of our camp, staring toward the meadow. "Listen," she said. I listened. At first, all I heard was normal forest sounds, wind in the trees, an owl hooting somewhere. Then I heard it. A soft, rustling sound, like something moving through the grass. But there was no wind. "Probably just a deer," I said, but I didn't believe it. "Deer don't move like that," Kevin said from behind us. He'd been awake too. The rustling got closer. And in the moonlight, I saw something that made no sense at all. The grass was moving, not swaying back and forth like it would in wind, moving forward. Like it was crawling toward us. "Pack up," I said. "We're leaving. Now." But Rebecca was already walking toward the meadow like she was in a trance. "Rebecca, stop!" She didn't seem to hear me. She kept walking, one slow step at a time, toward the bloodroot patch. Kevin and I ran after her. "Rebecca!" I grabbed her arm. She turned to look at me, and her eyes were completely blank, like no one was home. Then she blinked, and she was back. "What? Why am I—" "You were walking toward the flowers," Kevin said. "I was?" She looked confused. "I don't remember. I was just drawn to them somehow." That's when we heard the sound, a low humming, like 1,000 bees. But it wasn't coming from the air. It was coming from the ground, from the roots. "We need to leave," Kevin said. "Right now." But as we turned to go back to camp, I saw our tents. They were covered in vines, thick green vines with red flowers that definitely hadn't been there an hour ago, and the vines were moving, reaching toward us like fingers. "Run," I said. We ran through the forest in the dark, crashing through bushes and jumping over fallen logs. Behind us, I could hear that rustling sound getting louder. The plants were following us. We didn't stop until we reached my truck at the trailhead. Only then did I look back at the valley. In the moonlight, I could see the entire meadow moving. Every plant, every flower, every blade of grass swaying back and forth in perfect rhythm. Like the whole valley was breathing. Or like it was alive. We drove back to town, but none of us slept. Rebecca kept touching her arm where she'd brushed against one of the vines. By morning, there was a red mark there, like a rash. "It's probably nothing," she said, but I could tell she was worried. I called the Park Service and tried to explain what we'd seen. The supervisor listened politely, then suggested I take some time off. "Stress can make people see things, Sam. Finding those bodies was traumatic." But Kevin believed me. And more importantly, he started researching his family's history. My great-grat and father was a medicine man, he told us over coffee. He kept journals. I found them in my grandmother's attic last night. Kevin spread the old notebooks across the table. The pages were yellow and brittle, covered with handwriting in Cherokee syllabary and English. Listen to this, Kevin said, reading from one of the journals. The plants in the Valley of Blood Flowers have grown too strong. They call to our people now. Make them walk into the forest to feed the roots. We must not go there anymore. The plants remember our blood, and they want more. When was this written? Rebecca asked. 1875, right after the Civil War ended. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Kevin, what happened in that valley during the war? He turned more pages. A field hospital. Union soldiers who were too wounded to move. When the Confederates found them, Kevin's voice trailed off. What? They buried them alive, all of them. 200 soldiers buried in a mass grave right where those bloodroot flowers are growing now. Rebecca's rash had spread by afternoon. It crawled up her arm like red vines under her skin. She tried to hide it, but I could see her getting weaker. We need to get you to a doctor, I said. I'm fine. It's just a skin reaction. But she wasn't fine. And when she thought we weren't looking, I saw her staring toward the valley with that same blank look she'd had the night before. Against my better judgment, we went back. Rebecca insisted. She said she needed more plant samples to figure out what was making her sick. I knew it was dangerous, but I couldn't let her go alone. This time, we approached the valley from the south, staying in the thick forest instead of walking through the meadow. I brought my grandfather's old hunting rifle, though I wasn't sure what good it would do against plants. The valley looked different in daylight. The bloodroot patch had spread. It was twice as big as it had been 2 days before, and the flowers were redder now, the color of fresh blood. Look at the root systems, Rebecca said, pointing to exposed soil along a creek bank. I looked. The roots weren't growing down into the earth like normal plant roots. They were growing sideways, connecting to other plants. The entire valley floor was laced with a network of roots and underground stems. It's like a neural network, Rebecca whispered, like a brain. That's when we heard the humming again, louder this time and definitely coming from underground. The root network was communicating, sending chemical signals back and forth across the valley. Kevin was standing very still, listening to something we couldn't hear. Kevin? They're talking, he said quietly. The plants. They're talking to each other. Plants don't talk. These do. He looked at me with wide eyes. And they're talking about us. Rebecca suddenly stumbled. The red marks on her arm had spread to her shoulder and were creeping toward her neck. I feel, she started to say, then collapsed. Kevin and I carried her away from the creek, back toward the tree line. But as we moved, I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. The trees around us were moving, not swaying in wind. There was no wind. They were bending toward us, branches reaching down like arms. The whole forest, I breathed. It's all connected. Every plant in the valley was part of one massive organism, one consciousness that had been feeding on blood for over a century, growing stronger and smarter with every drop. We weren't just in danger from a patch of flowers. We were trapped inside a living creature the size of several football fields. Rebecca opened her eyes, but they weren't her eyes anymore. They were completely black, like pools of oil. Sam, she said in a voice that wasn't quite hers. Why did you come back? Before I could answer, vines erupted from the ground around us. Thick, muscular vines covered in thorns and red flowers. They wrapped around my legs, around Vin's arms, lifting us off the ground. The sweet metallic smell was overwhelming now, and through it all, I could hear something that sounded almost like laughter. The plants were enjoying this. Rebecca stood up, moving in jerky, unnatural motions. The red marks on her skin pulsed like a heartbeat. The network needs more, she said. It's been so hungry for so long. I fought against the vines, but they were incredibly strong. Kevin was struggling too, but the thorns were cutting into his arms. "Rebecca, fight it!" I shouted. "You're stronger than this thing." For just a moment, her eyes cleared. "Sam," she whispered. "I can feel it in my head. It's trying to use me." Then the blackness came back, and she smiled with too many teeth. "It's time to feed the roots," she said. The vines dragged us toward the center of the valley, where the bloodroot flowers grew thickest. I could see bones poking through the soil. Old bones, probably from the Civil War soldiers Kevin had told us about. But there were newer bones, too. Fresh ones. Dr. Harper and her team hadn't been the first. As we got closer to the massive bloodroot colony, I could see the truth. The entire patch was growing out of human remains. Decades of victims, maybe centuries, all feeding the same hungry network. Kevin was muttering something in Cherokee, words I didn't understand. But whatever he was saying, it seemed to make the vines hesitate. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Prayer," he gasped. "My great-grandfather's journal. There's a way to stop this, but—" Rebecca was walking beside us now, her movements still wrong and puppet-like. "The network remembers everything," she said in that voice that wasn't hers. "Every drop of blood, every scream. It learns. It grows." "Kevin, what way? What did your great-grandfather say?" Kevin's eyes met mine. "Fire. Cherokee fire ceremony. But someone has to stay behind to complete it." My heart sank. I knew what he was telling me. The vines lowered us to the ground in the center of the bloodroot patch. Up close, the flowers were even more horrible. The red color wasn't just in the petals anymore. It was in the stems, the leaves, even the roots. The whole plant had turned the color of blood. And they were moving, turning to face us like they had eyes. Rebecca knelt beside the largest cluster of flowers and placed her hands on the ground. Immediately, more red lines appeared on her skin, spreading faster now. "The network is almost ready," she said. "Soon it will be strong enough to spread beyond this valley. Every forest, every garden, humanity will feed the roots." I looked at Kevin. He nodded slightly, then started chanting in Cherokee. It was a fire song, I realized, a ceremony for cleansing corrupted ground. The plants reacted immediately. The humming turned into a shriek, not a sound you could hear with your ears, but something that went straight into your bones. The vines holding us tightened, and I felt thorns pierce my skin, but Kevin kept chanting, even as blood ran down his arms. Rebecca's head snapped toward him. "Stop," she hissed. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand perfectly," Kevin said, his voice steady despite the pain. "This is sacred ground. My ancestors' sacred ground. And you've polluted it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small bag of something that looked like tobacco. But when he scattered it on the ground, it started to smoke without any fire. Traditional Cherokee burning mixture, handed down through generations of medicine men. The plants went crazy. Vines erupted everywhere. Flowers screamed that bone-deep shriek, and the entire valley floor started to shake. I could feel the network's rage through the thorns in my skin. But the smoke was spreading, and wherever it touched, the red color drained from the plants. They withered, turned brown, died. Rebecca screamed, a sound no human throat should make. The black in her eyes flickered, and for a moment, he was herself again. "Sam," she gasped. I can't fight it much longer. Get out of here." "Not without you." But even as I said it, I could see the truth. The red lines had reached her heart. The network had too much of her now. Kevin scattered more of the burning mixture. The smoke formed a circle around us, and the vines pulling at our arms started to weaken. "Go," he shouted. "I have to complete the ceremony." I broke free from the dying vines and grabbed Rebecca's hand. "Come with me." She looked at me with her own eyes one last time. "I'm sorry, Sam. Tell my family I tried to fight it." Then the blackness came back, and she wasn't Rebecca anymore. She lunged at Kevin, trying to stop him from completing the fire ceremony. I had a choice: save myself or help Kevin finish what he'd started. I chose to help. I tackled Rebecca, pinning her to the ground while Kevin scattered the last of his burning mixture. The smoke rose in a column now, and I could smell something burning deeper than just plants. The network's roots, far underground, were catching fire. Rebecca fought like something wild, but her strength was fading as the network died around us. The red lines on her skin turned black, then crumbled away like ash. Kevin finished his chant and collapsed. But the fire ceremony was complete. The entire valley floor erupted in flames. Not normal fire. This burned cold and silver, consuming only the corrupted plants. The Bloodroot patch withered and died in seconds. The underground root network cracked and burned. And through it all, I could hear the network's death scream. A sound like 1,000 voices crying out in rage and pain. Rebecca went limp in my arms. The black drained from her eyes, but they stayed closed. I checked for a pulse. Nothing. The network had taken too much of her. When it died, it took her with it. Kevin was alive, but barely. The ceremony had drained everything from him. Did we stop it? He whispered. I looked around the valley. The silver flames were dying down, leaving behind black soil and withered plants. The humming was gone. The sweet metallic smell was gone. The network was dead. But so were Rebecca and Kevin. I carried Kevin out of the valley, but he died before I reached the truck. The fire ceremony had used up his life force. His last words were in Cherokee, something that sounded like a prayer. The Park Service found me 3 hours later, sitting by my truck in shock. I told them Rebecca and Kevin had died in an accident, that there'd been a fire. It wasn't exactly a lie. The official report blamed their deaths on toxic plant exposure and accidental inhalation of burning vegetation. The valley was declared contaminated and closed to the public indefinitely. I never told anyone the whole truth. Who would believe it? But I kept Kevin's great-grandfather's journals. And I started learning more about Cherokee plant medicine. Not the academic kind I'd studied in college, the real kind. The kind that knows some plants can think and feel and remember. 6 months later, I got a call from a ranger in Tennessee. They'd found 5 hikers dead near a Civil War battlefield, all drained of blood, lying in a circle around a patch of unusually red wildflowers. I drove down to look. Same pattern, same sweet metallic smell, same flowers turning to watch me as I walked by. The network hadn't been unique to our valley. There were others. I've spent the last year tracking them down. Battlefields where blood soaked into the ground, places where people died in large numbers. The plants remember, and they grow strong on memories of death. I'm not a forest ranger anymore. I quit and moved back to the Cherokee Reservation in North Carolina. I study with the medicine men now, learning the old ways my grandmother tried to teach me. Because someone has to know. Someone has to remember the ceremonies that can cleanse corrupted ground, and someone has to warn people when they find wildflowers blooming the wrong color. Last week, I got a call from a park ranger in Pennsylvania. Gettysburg Battlefield. Same story. Hikers found dead, no wounds, lying around red flowers that shouldn't exist. I'm driving up there tomorrow. If you're reading this and something happens to me, remember what I've told you. Some plants develop appetites. Some plants remember blood. And if you ever find wildflowers blooming out of season, especially if they're red when they should be white, walk away. Don't camp there. Don't pick samples. Don't try to study them. Just walk away and find someone who knows the old Cherokee fire ceremonies. Because the network isn't gone. It's just waiting, and it's always hungry. My name is Beth Grimthorne, and I've been a park ranger for 15 years. I teach families how to stay safe in the woods. I love my job because I get to help kids learn about nature and see their faces light up when they spot a deer or find a pretty rock. I work at Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina, in a place called Linville Gorge. It's beautiful, but dangerous. The cliffs are 2,000 feet high, and if you fall, you don't come back up. That's why I'm here. To make sure families know the rules and stay safe. I never believed the old stories. You know the ones. About ghost children who play in the woods and try to get other kids to follow them. The Cherokee people who lived here first have lots of stories like that. But I'm a teacher, not a storyteller. I believe in facts and safety rules. That was before the Morrison family. It was late October 1988. The leaves were turning colors, and there was frost in the mornings. The days were getting shorter, and fog would roll into the gorge like a gray blanket. Perfect camping weather, if you knew what you were doing. The Morrisons had signed up for my weekend family safety course. Mom, Dad, and 3 kids, ages 6, 8, and 10. They seemed like good people. The dad asked lots of questions about the trails. The mom packed extra snacks. The kids were excited, but listened when I talked about staying together and not going near the cliff edges. We spent Saturday learning about leave-no-trace camping and basic first aid. The kids practiced using whistles in case they got separated. Everything went perfectly normal. They set up their tent at the family campground about a mile from the gorge rim. Sunday morning, they didn't show up for breakfast. I hiked to their campsite. Their tent was still there, zipped shut, sleeping bags laid out neat and tidy, but no people. Their car was still in the parking lot, all there. Food was untouched. I called for backup and started a search. It took us 3 hours to find them. They were at the bottom of the gorge, 2,000 feet down. All 5 of them, holding hands in a perfect circle, like they had jumped together on purpose. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. There were no signs of a struggle. No torn clothes. No marks on the cliff edge showing they had slipped. The medical examiner said they had died from the fall, but their bodies looked peaceful, like they had just laid down to take a nap. The kids' footprints led right to the edge of the cliff. Small sneaker prints in the dirt, walking in a straight line. But there were no adult footprints running after them, no drag marks, nothing to show the parents had tried to stop them. It made no sense. No parent lets their children walk off a cliff. No family just decides to jump together without leaving a note or showing signs of being upset. But that's what the evidence showed. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those 3 kids, how excited they had been to learn about the forest, how the youngest one, Emma, had asked if deer ever fell off the cliffs by accident, how I had told her that animals are too smart to get that close to the edge. Maybe I should have listened to the old stories after all. The next week, I couldn't stop thinking about the Morrisons. I kept going back to the spot where we found them, looking for something I might have missed, some clue that would make it all make sense. That's when I met David Stormcrow. He worked for the Park Service too, but his job was to teach people about Cherokee history and culture. He was about my age, with long black hair and kind eyes that looked like they had seen too much. "You're the ranger who found the family," he said when he walked up to me at the cliff edge. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, I was there to eat you." I kicked at a loose rock. "I keep thinking I missed something." David was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "This has happened before." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "Families with children, all found at the bottom of the gorge holding hands. My grandmother told me stories, but I thought—" He shook his head. "I thought they were just stories." He took me to the park library and showed me old newspaper clippings. 1972, the Johnson family, parents and 2 kids. 1961, the Williams family, mom and 3 children. 1943, the Brooks family, all 4 of them. Going back and back, all the way to 1834. Always families with young children. Always found holding hands at the bottom of the gorge. Always no signs of struggle or accident. The Cherokee called this place where the children play, David told me. It was where kids would come for their growing up ceremonies. But something went wrong here long ago. The children never came back. I didn't want to believe him. I'm a teacher, not someone who believes in ghosts. But the newspaper clippings were real. The pattern was real. That's when Dr. Amanda Wells showed up. She was a child psychologist from Charlotte, and she had read about the Morrison family in the news. She wanted to study the site, try to figure out what might make a whole family walk off a cliff together. "Maybe it's something in the environment," she said when we met her at the ranger station. "Gas leaking from underground or some kind of plant that causes hallucinations. There has to be a scientific reason." Dr. Wells had brought her 8-year-old daughter Sarah with her. The little girl had blonde curls and big blue eyes, and she seemed fascinated by everything. While her mom took notes and asked questions, Sarah played quietly by herself. "Can I go look around outside?" Sarah asked. "Stay where I can see you," Dr. Wells said, not looking up from her notebook. I watched Sarah through the window. She was skipping around the parking lot, talking to herself the way kids do when they're playing pretend games. Nothing unusual. But then I noticed she was talking back to someone, having a full conversation, nodding and shaking her head like someone was answering her. "Sarah?" I called through the window. "Who are you talking to?" She looked up at me and smiled. "My new friends. They want to show me their favorite hiding places." I looked where she was pointing. Empty parking lot. No other kids anywhere. Dr. Wells laughed. "She has a big imagination, always making up invisible friends." But David had gone very still. He was staring at Sarah with a look I didn't like. "What friends, little one?" he asked gently. "The other kids. There's Tommy and Mary and Little Bear. They've been waiting for someone to play with for a really long time." Sarah giggled. "They say they know the best games." David grabbed my arm. "We need to get her away from here. Now." "What? Why?" Dr. Wells looked annoyed. "She's just playing." But I was remembering the Morrison kids, how excited they had been, how they had asked about the cliffs. "Sarah, come inside," I said. She pouted. "But my friends want to show me something cool. They say there's a place where you can see the whole forest. The cliff edge. Inside. Now." My voice was sharp enough that even Dr. Wells looked up. Sarah came inside, but she kept looking back over her shoulder. "They're following me," she whispered, like it was a secret. "They really want to play." David pulled me aside. "The Cherokee stories talk about children who died during their growing up ceremony. They got lost in a storm and never found their way to the spirit world. They've been waiting here ever since, trying to finish what they started." "That's impossible," Dr. Wells said. She had been listening. "There's no such thing as ghosts." "Then explain your daughter talking to people who aren't there," David said. "Explain 15 families over 150 years, all with children, all of Teals, on the same way." Dr. Wells looked at Sarah, who was now sitting in the corner, whispering to the empty air next to her. "We're leaving," Dr. Wells said suddenly. "This is ridiculous. Sarah, get your backpack." "But Mom, my friends want me to stay. They say they have something important to show me." "No, we're going home." Sarah started to cry. Not normal crying, but heartbroken sobs like someone had hurt her badly. "They need me, Mom. They've been alone for so long." And that's when we heard it. Children's laughter coming from outside, high and sweet and playful. But we were the only people there. Dr. Wells didn't leave. She couldn't. Because the next morning, Sarah wouldn't wake up. Not exactly wouldn't wake up. She was awake. But she wasn't really there. She would sit up, eat breakfast, brush her teeth, but her eyes looked far away, like she was listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. "They're teaching me a new game," she told her mom when Dr. Wells shook her gently. "It's called Follow the Leader. The winner gets to join their group forever." Dr. Wells was scared now. You could see it in the way her hands shook when she tried to take notes. But she was also stubborn. She was a scientist, and she wanted answers. So did I. That's why I went back to the spot where we found the Morrisons. It was early morning, and the fog was thick in the gorge. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. But I could hear them. Footsteps, small ones, like children running. The sound of giggling and whispering. A game of tag, maybe, or hide and seek. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there? This area isn't safe for kids." The giggling stopped. Then I heard singing, a lullaby in a language I didn't know, but the tune was familiar. The kind of song you sing to help children fall asleep. The fog started to clear, and that's when I saw them. Handprints in the mud, small ones, like they belonged to kids between 5 and 12 years old. But they were everywhere, on the ground, on the tree trunks, on rocks that were too high for any normal child to reach. And they were fresh. The mud was still wet, like the prints had just been made. But there were no children anywhere. I followed the handprints. They led to the cliff edge, then seemed to go right over, like the kids had just walked off into empty air. My radio crackled. David's voice, tight with worry. "Beth, you need to get back here, now!" I ran back to the ranger station. When I got there, I found Dr. Wells crying and David trying to calm down Sarah. The little girl was standing at the window, pressing her face against the glass. Her breath fogged it up, and in the fog she was drawing pictures with her finger. Pictures of children holding hands. Pictures of a cliff. Pictures of a long drop down. "They showed me," Sarah said dreamily. "They showed me how they fell. It didn't hurt," they said. "It was like flying." "Sarah, stop," her mother begged. "Please stop." But Sarah kept drawing. "They said their mommies and daddies came with them because they loved them so much. Everyone holds hands, so nobody gets scared." I felt sick. "Sarah, these friends of yours, what do they look like?" She turned away from the window. Her eyes were bright and strange. "They're kids like me, but their clothes are old-fashioned, and they don't have shadows. No shadows. They died a long time ago," she continued, like she was talking about the weather. "During a big storm, they were supposed to go through a special ceremony to become grown-ups, but they got lost. Now they can't find their way to where dead people go." David had gone pale. "The growing up ceremony," he whispered. "The vision quest. Cherokee children would go alone into the wilderness to find their spirit guides. But if they died before completing it, they'd be stuck," I finished. "Stuck between being children and being adults. Stuck between life and death. That's why they need other children," Sarah said matter-of-fact, to finish the ceremony with them, but it only works if the whole family comes too. That's what they told the Morrison kids. Dr. Wells grabbed her daughter's shoulders. "Sarah, listen. To me, these children, they're not your friends. They're dead. They want to hurt you." Sarah shook her head. "No, Mommy. They don't want to hurt anybody. They're just lonely. They've been playing the same games for so long, and they want someone new to play with." "What games?" I asked, even though I didn't want to know. "Red light, green light. Simon says, follow the leader." Sarah smiled. "The last game is called Jump Together. That's the one that lets you join the group forever. Jump together. Off the cliff." That afternoon, more families arrived for the weekend camping program. 3 families with a total of 8 children between them. I tried to cancel the program, but my supervisor said no. The Morrison case was officially ruled a murder-suicide, and there was no reason to shut down family activities. But I was watching, and David was watching, and Dr. Wells was keeping Sarah close, even though the little girl kept trying to wander off. Around sunset, I heard the children playing, all the children, the living ones and the dead ones together. The camping families had set up near the gorge rim, just like always. Their kids were running around, playing tag before dinner. Normal kid sounds, laughing, shouting, the kind of noise children make when they're happy. But mixed in with those sounds were others, voices that were too high, too sweet, laughter that echoed in ways it shouldn't, and underneath it all, that Cherokee lullaby. I watched from my cabin window. The camping family's children were playing with other children, children I couldn't see clearly but who cast no shadows in the firelight. One of the camping mothers looked over at her 7-year-old son. "Tommy, who are you playing with?" "Some other kids," he called back. "They know lots of fun games." The mother looked where her son was looking, squinted into the growing darkness. "I don't see anyone, Elan." "So, they're right here, Mom. This is Mary, and that's Little Bear, and that's Emma." Emma, the name of the youngest Morrison child. David appeared beside me. "It's starting," he said quietly. "Just like before." "What do we do?" "The ceremony," he said. "The one they never got to finish. If we can help them complete it, maybe they'll finally be able to rest. And if we can't?" He looked at me with those sad, knowing eyes. "Then tomorrow morning, we'll find 3 more families at the bottom of the gorge." I had to make a choice. Keep trying to fight something I didn't understand, or trust David and help him try something that sounded impossible. The children were all together now, the living ones and the dead ones. I could see them more clearly as the night got darker. The spirit children looked solid, real, but they moved wrong. Too graceful, too quiet. And they had no shadows, even in the bright firelight. There were dozens of them, Cherokee children from different time periods, wearing traditional clothing from when they had died. Some looked like they were from the 1800s, others more recent. All of them were between 5 and 12 years old. They were teaching the living children their games. "Red light!" called out a spirit girl in a buckskin dress. All the children froze. "Green light!" They ran toward the cliff edge. My heart stopped. But they stopped running before they reached the danger zone. This time. "We have to do something now," I told David. But Dr. Wells overheard. "I'm taking Sarah and leaving. This is insane." She tried to grab her daughter, but Sarah pulled away. "No, Mommy, I can't leave now. We're in the middle of a game and it would be rude to quit." "Sarah, please." "The rule is once you start playing, you have to finish," Sarah said. Her voice sounded different, older. "That's what went wrong the first time. The ceremony got interrupted by the storm, so they never got to become adults. They've been waiting for someone to help them finish it ever since." David knelt down next to Sarah. "Little one, what do they need to finish the ceremony?" "A guide," Sarah said simply. "Someone who knows the old ways. Someone who can show them the path to the spirit world." David looked at me. My grandmother taught me the vision quest ceremony before she died. I could try. "Try what?" Dr. Wells demanded. "This is all nonsense. Sarah, we're leaving right now." But when she reached for her daughter again, Sarah wasn't there. She had slipped away and was running toward the other children, toward the cliff edge. "Sarah!" Dr. Wells screamed and ran after her. I followed, and David followed me. But we were too slow. The children had formed a circle near the cliff edge, the living children and the spirit children, all holding hands. They were singing that Cherokee lullaby, and their voices blended together in a way that made my skin crawl. Sarah was part of the circle now, standing between two spirit children. Her mother reached the edge of the circle and tried to break through, but she couldn't. It was like there was an invisible wall. "Sarah, come back!" But Sarah was somewhere else. Her eyes were rolled back, and she was swaying with the rhythm of the song. All the living children looked the same way. Entranced. "They're in the ceremony now," David said quietly. "The vision quest has begun." The spirit children were getting clearer, more solid. I could see their faces now, hollow-cheeked with eyes that had seen too much. They looked hungry, not for food, but for something else. Completion, an end to their waiting. "What happens if the ceremony finishes?" I asked. David's face was grim. "The living children join them permanently. They become spirit guides for the Cherokee children, helping them cross over. But they can never go back to the living world." Dr. Wells was pounding against the invisible barrier, sobbing. "Let her go. Please, just let her go." That's when I realized something. The Spiri, the children, weren't evil. They were just kids who had been lost and scared for more than 100 years. They didn't want to hurt anyone. They just wanted to go home. But they didn't understand that taking the living children with them was wrong. "David," I said, "can you guide them without the living children? Can you complete the ceremony just for the spirit children?" He hesitated. "Maybe, but it would take all my strength. And if it goes wrong..." "If it goes wrong, they take the kids anyway," I finished. "We have to try." David nodded and stepped forward. He began to speak in Cherokee, words I didn't understand, but that felt ancient and powerful. The spirit children turned to look at him, their hollow eyes suddenly hopeful. The invisible barrier around the circle flickered. Dr. Wells pushed through and grabbed Sarah, yanking her back from the edge. The little girl blinked and looked confused, like she was waking up from a dream. But the other living children were still trapped in the circle. David kept speaking, his voice getting stronger. The spirit children began to glow with a soft, peaceful light. One by one, they started to fade. But then something went wrong. The youngest spirit child, a little Cherokee girl who couldn't have been more than 5, broke away from the circle. She ran towards Sarah, her face desperate. "Don't leave me alone again," she cried. "Please don't leave me alone." Dr. Wells tried to shield her daughter, but the spirit child passed right through her. She grabbed Sarah's hand, and suddenly both girls were glowing. "No!" Dr. Wells lunged forward, trying to break the connection. The cliff edge crumbled under her feet. I dove and caught her hand just as she went over, but I couldn't hold both her weight and my own. We were both going to fall. David finished the ceremony with a shout that echoed off the gorge walls. The spirit children flare. Ed, bright as stars, smiled with deep relief and disappeared. All except the little girl holding Sarah's hand. She was too young, David realized. Too young to complete the ceremony alone. She needed someone to help her cross over. Dr. Wells looked up at me from where she dangled over the cliff. "Take care of Sarah," she whispered, and then she let go. She fell with the spirit child, both of them glowing. At the bottom of the gorge, the light exploded bright as sunrise, then faded away. The spirit child had found her guide. Dr. Wells had chosen to help her cross over, sacrificing herself so Sarah could live. The other living children blinked awake, confused and scared, but alive. Sarah stood at the cliff edge, staring down into the darkness where her mother had disappeared, tears streaming down her face. The Cherokee children were finally at rest, but the price had been too high. That was 5 years ago. The official report said Dr. Amanda Wells died in a hiking accident while investigating the Morrison family tragedy. The surviving children, including Sarah, were treated for trauma and eventually returned to their families. Sarah went to live with her aunt in Florida. I get letters from her sometimes. She's doing well in school, makes friends easily, plays soccer, normal kid stuff. She never mentions what happened in the gorge. I don't work with families anymore. After what I saw, I couldn't stand to be responsible for other people's children. I transferred to wilderness rescue instead, still helping people, but adults who chose to take risks they understood. David left the Park Service entirely. He said the old stories were too heavy to carry around every day. Last I heard, he was teaching Cherokee language at a school in Oklahoma. The gorge is still open to hikers, but not to family camping. The official reason is erosion concerns along the cliff edge. The real reason is that 3 more families inquired about camping there after reading about the Morrison case in the news. Some people are drawn to places where terrible things happened. I make sure to, don't get the chance to find out why. I still hear the children sometimes, when I'm working late shifts at the rescue station. Faint laughter carried on the wind, the sound of running feet. But it sounds different now, peaceful. Like they're finally playing the games they're supposed to play in the place where they belong. Sarah's last letter included a drawing she made in art class. It showed a woman with long dark hair standing at the edge of a cliff, holding hands with a small child. Both of them had wings. She wrote on the back, "I dream about Mommy sometimes. She's not sad anymore. She's helping other lost kids find their way home." I keep the drawing on my desk as a reminder that some stories the old people tell aren't just stories. A reminder that children see things adults miss. And a reminder that sometimes the scariest thing isn't the monsters in the dark. It's realizing that they aren't monsters at all. If your children ever start talking about invisible friends who want to show them something, take them home immediately. Don't ask questions. Don't try to reason with them. Just leave. Because some games, once you start playing, you have to finish. And the prize for winning is not what you think it is.